Mom. There's one in every high school, an activity that everyone does for months on end, a fad everyone talks about, and if you aren't doing it, you don't get to participate in the conversation. I'm not talking about drugs or sex, I'm talking about scaring each other. For months in my high school, all anyone could talk about was the haunted houses they visited over the weekends. Jeff floated up the stairs. You could hear the woman crying out for her children. I called bullshit on all of their stories. Even the ones people clearly thought they experienced, figuring it was faulty wiring or old houses settling. I wasn't too interested in their stupidity, but little did I know I was about to experience things for myself, unwillingly. I'm from a very small town in the upper Midwest. My childhood home was literally in the middle of nowhere. Our closest neighbor was about a mile away. The home I grew up in until I was 14 was a rental. Then my parents bought some land and moved a huge old Victorian farmhouse onto it. The house hadn't been occupied in several years, probably decades. The last person who owned it wanted it off his property so the cows could roam free on the land. I still don't know when the house was built, but the original basement had a sign that it was 1909 was the year they installed the furnace, so sometime before that. After the house was moved, there were some repairs that needed to be done before we could move in. It was months before we were able to put anything into it. The first night we actually got to stay there was when I realized my family was not the only ones living in it. My parents picked me up from a school function late on a Saturday. The new house was kind of on the way to the old house, so when my dad turned on the road to go to the new house, I asked, "Where are we going?" To which my dad just smiled. I kindly reminded him that I had the clothes on my back and nothing else to say at the new house. We took a detour back to the old house, grabbing the essentials: toothbrush, pajamas, books, posters. We headed back to the new house. I spent the remainder of my evening putting up the posters I had saved from numerous magazines of cute boys and even cuter animals. I hadn't put them up in the old house, not wanting to rip them down to put in the new house. I listened to music and set up my room for a while before going to bed. Before I go any further, I need to give you a layout of sorts of this house. There are 4 levels: basement, main floor, upstairs, attic. The basement is basically a large living area with the laundry area, no bedrooms down there. The main level is kitchen, dining room, fancy living room, small bathroom. Upper level is 4 bedrooms with the second full bathroom. Attic is a big open space. My parents gave me the option to have my bedroom in the attic or have the master bedroom on the 2nd floor since I would be moving out in a few years. I chose the actual bedroom because I want the closet. The attic never creeped me out. I seriously considered taking it as my room, but I'm a closet girl. What could I say? When you walk up the stairs to the left is my sister's room, and my room because they are both the biggest. On the right is a smaller spare bedroom, my brother's room, and the bathroom between the 2 rooms. The hallway is very wide, and at the end of the hallway is a door to the upper level of the porch. When we first moved in, there was no porch yet, so the door led to a long drop onto a rocky driveway. The master bedroom is huge, almost a perfect square. Since I had not been able to set up my room that day, my sister and her friend set it up for me. They put my dresser by the door, the desk by the window, and the bed on the opposite side of the room from the door. They did a pretty good job. I just had to personalize it, so I turned on some music and shut my door so anyone trying to sleep wouldn't hear. My brother's room is right across the wide hall from mine. His bed was right next to his bedroom door, and his door was cracked open just a bit. By the time I went to bed, everyone else in the house was sleeping. I was just falling asleep in my new bed at the new house when I woken by a whisper. "Mom, Mom." Like when you're little and you wake up in the middle of the night to find you wet the bed or thrown up all over yourself, so you go get your mom and whisper right next to her ear. That's what I heard. I opened my eyes to see nothing. I had cracked open my bedroom door just a tiny bit to allow the hall light to seep in, just in case I woke up and needed to use the bathroom without having to turn on the lights. My closet door was also open about 3 inches. There was no one there who could have whispered. Confused, I fell back asleep thinking it was probably my brother who woke up and being 7 in the new house for the first time was disoriented about what was going on. I didn't say anything to anyone at first, but after I thought more about it, there was no possible way I could have heard my brother whisper from that far away. I couldn't stop thinking about the strange whisper and who it could have been. Also, I'd like to remind you, I now occupy the master bedroom where my parents of the previous family most likely slept. Finally, I told my mom. To my surprise, she didn't dismiss me or tell me I was hearing things or that the house was probably settling. She paused just a second, most likely trying to decide if I was mature enough to handle what she was about to tell me, and said, "I've heard it too." The Silhouette. If you've watched Mom, great. If you haven't, I highly recommend watching it before this to have a better understanding of the situation. All of the events I'm about to describe all happened, for real, to me and my family. It's okay if you don't believe it. I honestly wouldn't either if I was hearing it. I never believed any of the stories from my friends that had experiences. They all seemed like bullshit. I'm still skeptical when I hear some stories. They seem a little too far-fetched or exaggerated for entertainment. Not mine. These are 100% true accounts of what happened. Now, I don't know how the ghost world works. Maybe they're in another dimension. Maybe they could think they're still living. Maybe they could see or sense us all the time, or maybe just at certain times. Our ghost wasn't always around, but he sure made his presence known as soon as there was activity in the house. It hadn't been occupied in decades, so maybe this little kid ghost had been alone for so long, and now all of a sudden there are people around again and he's trying so hard to get our attention. It makes me a little sad to think about it. At 14, you're pretty susceptible to everything around you. Friends, family, movies, and TV. As my mom was studying the look on my face, trying to decide if I should know the whole story, I'm sure these thoughts went through her mind. Does she want to scare the shit out of me, or should she just leave it alone and let me figure things out for myself? She chose option A. I also think she was relieved someone else had experienced something, so she wasn't alone and thought she was just hearing strange voices. She had been under a lot of stress to get the house ready for her family to live in, staying up well into the night at the house, got up to get us ready for school, still had a job, and took at least 2 hours out of every day to do some sort of cardio. She was superwoman. No wonder she may have thought she was just hearing things. Lack of sleep alone will do that to a person. In the winter, my mom rode her stationary bike in the living room after we all went to school. It was loud and obnoxious, so she had to turn on the TV up to a ridiculous volume to be able to hear it over the bike. This was why she preferred to be at home alone when she rode it, so she didn't disrupt everyone else in the house. This was when my mom heard the whisper, "Mom, Mom." She heard it over the loud bike and the loud TV. She paused everything to listen. Completely alone in the house and knowing she was, it was quite a shock. She didn't hear it again, so she kept riding. This is what she told me after I told her I had heard it. Then she said there was more. Over the winter was when she would go to work on the house. Winter in the Midwest means it's dark by 5 p.m. We're used to it, no biggie. So one night, my mom, exhausted, goes to leave the new house to go home to bed. She's driving away from the house down the driveway when she notices she left the upstairs hall light on. She stops the car to go back in and turn it off when she notices something strange. There's someone in the window up there. It appears to be the silhouette of a small child's head and fingers peeking out through the window in the door, as if the child isn't quite tall enough, so they're standing on their tiptoes, gripping the frame to see what's outside. My mom didn't go back in to turn off the light. That was the first sighting. The second was a couple months before we moved into the new house. My parents met with some friends at a bar. They happened to run into the electrician who worked on the house before we moved into it. He had quite the story for them. If my parents were working on the house, it was open and unlocked. You could get from the basement to the attic, no problem. When my parents weren't there, but crews were working on it, they only had access to the basement. The electrician was making a few changes and checks one evening, making sure all was working properly. He had been in and out of the basement, looking at lights and whatnot. He was outside making sure the yard light was going to come on once it got dark enough, and happened to look up at the house and see the silhouette of a child in an upstairs bedroom. He was there alone with no crew members or their children, and didn't even have access to the main level, let alone the second floor. He was clearly shaken up by it and was relieved when my mom said she had also seen a similar silhouette in the window of the door at the end of the hall. He said it wasn't in the hall window, it was in the bedroom to the right. My bedroom. Elliot. So it's been a while since I've been able to continue my story. Sorry. If you're seeing this part for the first time, you should probably go back and watch Mom and The Silhouette, because this might not make any sense if you don't. If you had watched them both, you are aware of the child haunting the home I grew up in. He's been spotted and heard. Now I'd like to tell you about a little research my mom did after I told her about the creepy whisper I heard the first night we stayed here. I mentioned my parents moved the house onto some land they purchased. The previous owner was an elderly man who ended up in hospice care, unable to carry on a conversation for too long. When my mom went to visit him, she realized she was not going to get very far by talking to him. He couldn't even remember who she was. No biggie, there are records and death certificates, right? Well, sort of. She ended up finding a small cemetery near the location the house was originally standing. It was a small family one, overgrown and hard to find, but there was a grave that was marked Elliot. The marker said the child died at 6. That seemed about right. A 6-year-old would behave the way our ghost was behaving. But why had Elliot died? In the early 1900s, kids died in their sleep because of numerous things that doctors back then didn't even know about. Simple diseases we're now vaccinated for were terminal back then. Sad, I know. Not completely satisfied with her findings, my mom headed to the library to see what else she could find. Records weren't kept as well as they are today back then, but she did find something. There was a small obituary on a child named Elliot who was said to be about 4 years old. Okay, now what are the chances of a child around the same age, with the same name, dying around the same time on the same property? I think someone messed up on the age or year Elliot died. Either way, Elliot didn't go where they were supposed to go. Not knowing if Elliot is a boy or girl, I have a feeling he's a boy, so from here on, I will call him a he. My mother had to be content with her search for the time being. There are now no living relatives to ask, so we have to rely on records even though there may not be totally accurate. It's a bummer. I'm curious about this child. Why is he still here? What does he need? How can we help him? I have no idea. Not that I didn't try. After that first night of hearing him whisper, I kept the closet door closed, not wanting him to wake me up again. I spent a few evenings in my closet on a beanbag chair trying to talk to him and getting no response. I had some luck with the Ouija board at a friend's birthday party once. I suppose you like to hear that story, and since it's somewhat relevant, here, I'll tell you. My best friend from childhood had lost her grandmother to a heart attack very suddenly when we were in 4th grade. As a 4th grader, those things aren't understood fully like they are when you're older. It really hit her a few years later when she finally realized what had happened, and she got super bummed she hadn't been able to say goodbye. That's when one of us suggested a spirit board. What's the worst that could happen? In our case, her grandma can visit us, and that's exactly what happened. Throughout the night, I had been constantly pulling my hair behind my ear when my grown-out bangs got in my face. Typical 13-year-old, but I wasn't able to push them out of my face since my fingers were glued to the planchette where we were summoning the spirit. I was looking down at the board waiting for words to be spelled out when my hair was gently scooped out of my face and placed behind my ear, much like a grandmother would do for her granddaughter. After what seemed like several minutes, I looked at my friend who was crying. We all immediately took our fingers off the board to console her. Admittedly, a little freaked out, my friend said she was able to say goodbye to her grandma because she had appeared in the corner and smiled at her. She was the only one who saw her, but I told her she had put my hair back behind my ear for me. She had been a wonderful lady, and it wouldn't have been out of the ordinary for her to do that for me. That was before my encounter with Elliot. If my only other spiritual experience had been a less pleasant one, I may have been more apprehensive about the whisper. And since it had been a successful one, I decided to have some friends over and try it myself. We got nothing. Not even a glimmer. Maybe it's because he wasn't related to any of us, or he was just hiding or shy. We will never know. I didn't hear him again while I lived there. That doesn't mean he didn't announce his presence. But that's another story for another day. Keep creepin', peeps. How losing my mother saved my life. My mother died a little over 2 years ago on October 31st of 2016. It was sudden and sort of unexpected. But then when does one look at death as expected? I digress. Apologies, reader, I tend to ramble. Kudos to you if you get to the end, and it's a bit of a long, painful story, but I feel it's important as well as therapeutic to tell. I moved away from my family, my mom especially, since she and I were the closest, about 3 years ago. My mom was of course sad to see me go, but knew it was best for my family. So I moved, and unbeknownst to me, my mother neglected her own health to care for my asshole male DNA donor and my autistic but amazingly intelligent younger brother. So she got sick. Really sick. Like rushed to the hospital and into the ICU kind of sick. I'm my mother's POA, so I was notified, and she called me to tell me not to panic. So I panicked. Big time. She tells me she had a hard time breathing one day, so my brother tried to convince her to go to the ER. And it got so bad that she got scared and called 911. Saved her life. For a little while. Turns out my mother had a severe case of pneumonia. She smoked. I had suspected for years she had COPD, and she knew but wouldn't tell me. So okay, pneumonia. I work in the medical field. I know it's serious but treatable, and she's obviously doing okay if she's calling me, right? Except at the end, she drops the bombshell. They found cancer on her chest CT. My mother had cancer. That was the first time in the next few weeks my world would shift on its axis. This was October 10th. So I cry and I freak out, but when the nurse takes over and I start asking about stages, type, treatment plans, scans, etc., she was very vague, but told me it was bad. She had met with an oncologist and was going to do chemo. So I relaxed a little, figured it was gonna suck, but we would get through this. The next weeks went by in a blur. I spoke to my mother daily, usually on my ride to work to see how chemo went, how she was feeling, etc. I had made a trip home 2 days after I found out, thanks to some amazing friends and family that helped me and my husband get there. So I laid eyes on her, judged for myself how bad I thought it was. I called her after her chemo appointment, Thursday, October 27th. She was feeling okay, but very tired, so we didn't talk long. I could recall exactly where I was on my drive and what song on Pandora I paused to talk to her. Her last words to me were "bless you for ringing." My mother was British and very verbally proper, so that was her typical goodbye. I hung up from that call not knowing that that would be the last time I heard her voice. Everything was going okay from then up until October 29th. My world shifted again. I got a frantic email from my brother. He doesn't like phones, stating our mother was in the hospital and something about papers that if her heart stopped again, that they couldn't restart it and I needed to call the hospital. So I have a feeling of absolute dread sinking in. It's 10 o'clock at night. What is going on? I call the hospital and find out she is in the ER. Okay, she got sick. Let's talk to charge to find out why. I actually got to talk to the ER doctor that told me my mother was intubated and unconscious in the ER. Cue panic attack. My mother had gotten sick at home, vomited, and we think she aspirated or inhaled her vomit. Bad times. My poor brother called 911 and they came to their house and resuscitated her. But she had suffered brain damage or something because she wouldn't wake up. Then the really bad shocking news. My mother signed a DNR, or Do Not Resuscitate, which means she had legal papers saying that they had to remove the tube and let her go. My mother didn't tell anyone. It wasn't until they got her to the hospital and pulled her records they knew. I am over 800 miles away, and this doctor is saying he has to let my mother die. I am sobbing at this point, begging him to keep it long enough for me to get home to see her. He refused, saying it was her wish to go. I had no choice but to agree. So I went to bed thinking my mother died that night. I called the hospital the next day expecting the news, but my mother was still alive. My hopes soared. My mom is a fighter. The nurse tells me she still isn't conscious. I told her to tell my mom, hang on, I'm coming. I made the 12-hour plus drive home to get to the hospital to see my mother. I got there at 1 a.m. on October 31st. Halloween, my favorite holiday. The third time my world shifted on its axis was sitting in the hospital parking lot preparing to go see my mother. Walking into the hospital was surreal, like I was watching some other daughter walk down the hall to her mother's ICU room. One thing about ICU is how quiet they can be. I stopped at the nurse's desk, told them who I was and who I was there to see. The nurse gave me a sympathetic look and took me to her room. The second I stepped foot in her doorway, I knew my mother was gone. A husk of her lay in that hospital bed, truly one of the most horrific things I have ever seen. Her body struggled to live, these horrible gasping respirations. She was gone, but her body was still here. Meds kept her blood pressure up enough to sustain life. I wanted to rip it all off of her. This wasn't right. I knew my brother needed to be there to say goodbye, so I sat by my mother's bedside alone for 9 hours watching her gasp for air. Her body had shut down, except her heart, lungs, and a tiny portion of brain. It was the worst thing I ever had to do, but I talked to her, told her about my babies and how excited they were to trick or treat. My brother, an asshole, got to the hospital around 9:30. My mom's oncologist met me before they got there and dropped the bombshell the cancer my mom had was ovarian, with mets everywhere. And she recommended I get tested for the gene that increases risks. I just kind of nodded in shock. I signed the papers to take my mom off all medical support shortly after she left. Once my brother, an asshole, got there, the nurse took all the machines and lines off, and I held her hands as they gave her meds to make her comfortable. My mother died October 31st at 10:07 in the morning. My whole world fell off its axis. I was now the caretaker of my family, and I had to figure out how to be her. I got things as situated as I could in the 3 days I could stay, arranged her cremation as she wanted, and ended up paying for it because the asshole left her life insurance lapse. I grieved the loss of my mother heavily and had to scramble to take care of my brother, an asshole. To say I was stressed and busy was an understatement. I put the oncologist warning out in my head. Until almost 2 years later when I had pain in my abdomen. Then suddenly her warning popped in my head. I had blood work done and found out I do carry that gene that increases my cancer risk. Right as my own doctor finds a mass on my ovary. Cue world shift again. My doctor immediately orders more scans and schedules me for surgery rather than do a biopsy and wait. I'm on board with this idea, so I went in for surgery December of last year. My doctor found a suspicious mass on my left ovary. He removed both ovaries, both tubes, and mass. The biopsy on the mass actually came back benign, but on my other ovary, the one with no visible mass, they found stage 1 cancer. I had ovarian cancer and had no idea. By doing the surgery, the surgeon actually caught it early. If my mother had not died of ovarian cancer and her doctor told me to get genetically tested, I would not have known I had it until it was too late. Ovarian cancer spreads quickly, and usually by the time it's found, like my mother, it's too late. My blood test result pushed my doctor to do more than biopsy, and removing both ovaries, he caught the real threat. My mother's death saved my life, along with the BRCA gene test. I cannot stress enough that everyone should get that test to find out your cancer risks. Knowledge is power, especially in healthcare. I have sent my mother's oncologist flowers every year on her birthday and Halloween. Let's go back to late August 2017 when I, after not going on a date or actually even talking to a man for 9 months, decided to download Tinder and Bumble. Turns out it's all the same people on both apps. Same dis, different pics, am I right? I met a guy named Mike. We talked and drank beer at the since closed Green Lake Bar and Grill for 3 lovely hours, and afterward I walked him to his car. His car, because I suck at parallel parking, and in an effort to avoid having the patrons at my destination witness the embarrassing attempts and failures of properly operating a vehicle, I have been deemed fit to drive for over a decade. I find an empty street, ditch the car, and walk half a mile or more every time. Gotta get my steps. Do people still count those? I don't. Whatever. Anyway, we get to his car and it's a wreck, full of overflowing cardboard boxes and garbage in the back seat. The exterior paint is peeling and there are empty cigarette boxes strewn about, tobacco ash on every surface, spilling like slow lava flows from every crevice. Crooked butts peek out from under the seats like the stale McDonald's french fries of my grandmother's minivan throughout my childhood. I am half convinced that Mike has lived full time in this car at one point recently. Total dirtbag aesthetic. So naturally, I was swooning. We said goodbye and hugged briefly, politely. He didn't try to kiss me. A dirtbag, possibly homeless dude who isn't even into me. Hot damn. Yes, please. I was fantasizing about all kinds of dirty things during the tokenesque journey back to my car. It dawned on me very quickly that my chances of having sex in the near future had increased from 0% to whether or not Mike's car could survive the drive to my place if we were ever decide to hang out again. I looked up local mechanics and tow trucks just in case. I made a special trip to Safeway the following day to purchase condoms. I found a shopping basket and headed toward the aisle where I assumed condoms were kept. My anxiety reminded me that I am not mentally or socially equipped to make a purchase of just condoms, even if I paid for it through self-checkout during the mid-afternoon lull I was strategically counting on. Discretion, modesty, and decades of sexual shame directed at women prompted me to first wander through the produce section. I actually needed bananas and grabbed a few cucumbers, carrots, and then tossed in a package of pre-made guacamole, a box of brown sugar Pop-Tarts, and a few things to reduce the phallic-shaped objects piling up in my basket to further conceal the condoms. Dating is hard. That's what she said. I grabbed a box of a dozen condoms feeling optimistic and proceeded to argue silently, as to not draw attention, with this register that scanned items were already placed in the bagging area. Why is this still a thing? Fix this. I got home and unpacked the reusable shopping bag, only to realize the condoms were not in the bag. I looked around the kitchen and the space near my door where I dropped stuff and piled up shoes. Nothing. I checked the car next because what I lack in parking skills, I make up for in taking turns too fast when driving alone. Like I don't know if I want to live or die, and I need those little moments I'm not sure if the tires are going to stay on the ground. I feel a little lift or a slide and know, because I'm close to death, that I'm alive and like it. But the condoms were nowhere to be found. The receipt confirmed I paid for them. I was frustrated because I spent like $40 just to buy condoms and I didn't even get them home. If nothing else, I am a bee on a budget and I can't afford to go through that ordeal again. Reason told me to call the store. Reason is an a-hole. The call went like this. Thanks for calling Safeway. This is Timmy, or some other teenage-specific names adults never have. How can I help you? Yeah, hi, I just went through self-checkout and got home, and one of the items I purchased didn't make it home with me. Is there anything I could do? Oh, sure, I could check to see if you left it over there, he said, with the professional level of enthusiastic charm that is required for bullshit customer service calls. We usually keep stuff on the side when people forget things. What's the item? This is the part of the sitcom where Jack Morris pauses life at Bayside High School and speaks directly to the audience, telling them how I am about to heck everything up. Jim Halpert is making that face at the camera. Classic horror movie music starts playing at an ominously increasing volume that everyone but me and the fisherman from Jaws can hear. Boisterous women in movie theater audience are yelling, "Hang up the phone, you dumb bee!" This is real life, and I can't hear them. I imagine if I could, their cries would haunt me like Clarice and the Screaming Lambs. Plus, I am masochistic, or a moron, possibly both. Yeah, I say in my almost Bill Lumbergh tone. It was condoms? The pitch of my voice rose as I spoke the last word like a question, like I wasn't sure if I wanted to say it. I didn't. Timmy tried to put the call on hold before he started giggling. He was not successful. I am on hold. This is the part of the sitcom where Zach Morris pauses Bayside High. Jim and the shark from Jaws have teamed up and are both making that face through the office blinds. A woman screams, clapping between words, "Hang up the phone!" SpongeBob SquarePants comes to my defense, mocking their pleas for sanity, leaning forward, hands on their hips, eyes bulging. "Hang up the phone!" I don't. Timmy returned to the call after a long enough pause to tell every employee in the store that some girl is on the phone because she lost her condoms and doesn't have the self-respect/budget to just eat the $12 and move on with her life, and she is actually calling the store. He is pleased to finally have a funny story to tell the girl in his math class he has a crush on her for years. "Hi, I don't see any..." He hesitates like he's searching for the word on Ask Jeeves in 1998. The page eventually loads and he continues. "Condoms over there, but you could bring your receipt to the customer service desk and get another box." I regain control of my life. "Yeah, that's not gonna happen, thanks." I hung up. "Finally!" screams the frustrated, fictitious audience of my life. I then, like any sane and reasonable adult who isn't still jaded about Bezos' tax evasion, ordered a box of 36 condoms from Amazon for about the same price as the dozen at Safeway to be delivered, discreetly packaged to my door/leasing office within 1 to 2 business days. And I mean, I am still bitter about Bezos, but the annual Prime account fee already went through for the year, so to cancel now would be like giving him the money, so I might as well use it and cancel my membership before the next billing cycle. I tell myself for the 4th year in a row. I laid in bed cursing my alarm the following morning when I remembered my pre-made splurgy guacamole and jumped up to make avocado toast before my early morning class. Insert millennial joke here. Everyone laughs except the millennials rolling their eyes and drowning in student loan debt. I took the carton of eggs, bottle of Tapatio, and guacamole out of the fridge. There, on the middle shelf, hidden under the guacamole, sat a silver box containing a dozen Trojan Ultra Thins. I fought the urge to walk away from the kitchen and meet my stupid fate in the middle of the busy street. Police investigating my death would note the open refrigerator door and its unlikely contents, nodding in unison that this was the cause of my untimely but expected and understandable death. And honestly, this is the kind of thing that has happened before. Enough times that I should have checked the refrigerator before I checked the floor of my car. But again, I am a moron. Clearly in optimistic denial about the kind of person I really am. I spent the next 30 minutes scouring the internet trying to figure out if condoms are still effective after being refrigerated for 24 hours, and realized that I am the only person, out of like 8 billion of us, y'all, that has needed to know this information. And I still don't. There was a customer service phone number on the back of the box, but I heard the lamb screaming and threw the condoms away. I got slapped by my parents and they took away everything from me. So my parents caught me at my boyfriend's yesterday and they went ape shit crazy. Now, before I tell this story, keep in mind, I'm 21. Now on to the story. So before anybody asks, yes, I did live with my parents, even though I'm 21. I wanted to save up enough money for me to be able to move out of the house and be able to live in a nice place. I was almost done paying off my car, which they took away now, so it was all pointless. So I was close to moving out. My relationship with my parents has always been rocky. We pretty much don't agree on anything because they are very, and I mean very, old school. They are also strict when it comes to me going out. They're strict to the point where I wasn't allowed to go out past 10 p.m. If I did, then I would get yelled at and they would take away the truck that I was working so hard to pay off. Again, keep in mind, I'm 21. Long story short, they're super strict and very old-fashioned, so I didn't like that, which is why I was planning on moving out soon after I was done paying my car, which was in 4 months. Well, yesterday, I skipped school. I know, super bad of me, to go to my boyfriend's so that he could help me look for a place. I had told my mom that I was in school because I didn't want her to know that I was actually looking at places and trying to figure out a way for me to move out sooner. So me and my boyfriend are sitting down in my truck when all of a sudden my dad opens my car door and slaps me across the face. Me and my boyfriend were so shocked to see my dad that we just stood there, which pissed my dad off more, and so he proceeded to slap me again and started to tell my boyfriend off. I couldn't figure out how the hell they knew I was at my boyfriend's till my mom told me that she was tracking my phone. Keep in mind, I'm 21. So I'm over here getting slapped across the face in shock, and my boyfriend is shocked as well. So we are just standing there while my parents are yelling at us. I finally woke up from my shock after a while, so I yelled at them to stop yelling like wild animals and to take me home. They did just that after they calmed down, but the walk to my parents' car was the most embarrassing thing ever because I felt like a 14-year-old getting picked up by her parents after she tried to sneak out. Again, keep in mind, I'm 21. I also felt even more embarrassed because pretty much all of his family witnesses me getting slapped by my parents. I just couldn't believe my parents had actually done that shit. Honestly, please someone answer me and tell me if this is normal. So we got home and they proceeded to tell me off and go off on me. And I just kept packing up my stuff because I just can't stay in this place after that shit happened. I mean, come on, I got slapped in public by my parents. To make matters worse though, they took away the truck that they sold to me. The truck that I worked hard for just because I want to move out and live my life on my own after what happened. Note, before any of you ask, I can't call the cops on my parents for taking away the truck because my dumbass trusted them when they told me that they would put the car under my name as soon as I was done paying it. In the meantime, the car is under their name, which is why I can't really take legal matters until I show proof that I paid for the truck, which I'm sure will not do much help. Or will it? I'm asking any lawyers out there who are reading this. So now I'm stuck in a situation where I want to move out, but I'm not sure if I should because my parents pretty much kept all of my money and I don't have a car to take me places anymore. Moral of the story is truly be careful of those who you trust because even your own family will sometimes do you dirty. Also make sure that your crazy parents aren't tracking you. Another thing I forgot to mention is that they took away my social security number and my green card, all because I didn't pay for them and I'm ungrateful. B, I was 8 when I got my green card. How the heck am I supposed to pay you? Tinder date turns into clingy and aggressive guy. Okay, true story. I had been dating a guy for several years, and after a number of tense and tough conversations regarding some issues we considered irreconcilable, we broke up. I was single for about 7 months, whole and healed. I understood why we broke up and believed that because of our mutual refusal to bend to the other person, it was for the best. I go on Tinder. I'm a busy gal, and I wanted some food and some wine and an orgasm or two. I made that pretty clear in messaging with several guys, and then the humor and personality of one guy made me agree to the date. It was fun, he had a great personality, and the conversation flowed relatively easy. I went back to his place and we hung out for a while longer, and I ended up going home. Only dinner and wine that night. Then we agreed to meet up again, and I'm thinking about sex. I make that pretty clear. Not in a I'm gonna use you for sex way, but in a I'm on this app because I'm horny and I prefer a real penis to what I've been using for 7 months way. Still, no sex. And the second date, it got a little deeper. Not like, tell me about your familial drama and deepest fears, just who do you want to be? What do you want to do in life? I realize we are pretty far off on the spectrum of our goals, and I don't think you have to line up on goals, but at least drive or ambition. I'm thinking, he's nice, but I don't think I want this to go anywhere. So I tell him that. He says it's fine. He knows what Tinder is for, and he gets it. He thanks me for my honesty, y'all. Fast forward a week or so of texting, schedule's not lining up, still no sex. I'm talking to a few other guys on Tinder, and then my ex after 7 months of running into each other for work-related stuff. We don't work together, but people we work with each of us. In the occasional text, he asked if I need any help moving. A mutual friend mentioned I'd ask for their help. He figured he would offer. Anyway, the ex can't make the move in a day, but comes the day after to help me mount my TV, set up my bed frame, and install a cat door. He was a little weird when he got there, but it was fine. And then, randomly, in the middle of us mounting the TV, he tells me that he's done a lot of thinking. He's talked to his closest friends and his dad about it. He's not big on asking for help, so that's quite the step. And he wants to know if I'm still single. He wants to take me on a date because he realized that some of the issues we broke up over either weren't issues anymore or weren't worth it if it meant he didn't get to have me in his life. Straight out of a damn rom-com this moment was. Meanwhile, in my head, I'm thinking, how is this real? People don't actually do this. You don't break up for 7 months and then get back together. I tell him I've been going on dates and there's a guy who I've been going out with specifically. It's nothing serious, but I don't feel good about just dropping him, and I don't feel good about just jumping back into a relationship we quit for good reasons. So I sent him on his way. After the rest of the installs were done, and I told him I'd think it over. I tell the Tinder guy as soon as we talk next. I'm not in the business of playing with hearts, and I don't want to feel like I'm cheating on someone, even though I'm technically dating no one. He says it's cool, he gets it. Then we do have sex. It's awful. He takes a medication that makes his parts not work all the way, and he was very porny about the whole encounter. In the let's trade positions every 2.5 seconds, and I'm gonna slap your ass hard without mentioning it, and choke you a little without mentioning it before. I faked an orgasm so it would be over, and then he said he couldn't get off without watching porn anyways. Okay, what a fun day. Tinder for the win. Several weeks go by, no sex, a few dates with each guy, lots of tough and intentional conversations with the ex. We come to an agreement. We decide a trial run of dating without sex for about a month and see if it could work. I tell Tinder guy, it's over, I'm going with the ex. He absolutely loses it. Sends me 20 texts in about as many seconds, calls me several times, and ends up telling me I'm not as strong as I think I am if I'm going back to him, as if he was an abusive asshole I fled from. Tells me I'm not even that attractive, that I'm weak-minded and pathetic. Continues texting me mean things, leaves me a very mean voicemail. Luckily, I had just moved and he only had my phone number. Probably stalked me on social media, but didn't have my old or new address. I ended up telling him that it had nothing to do with him, that I was sorry and it wasn't my intention, that we weren't even dating and there was someone out there for him, that we were better as familiar strangers. He really didn't like that and ended up telling me that he loved me and that I was the closest thing to it he'd ever met and that he would never move on. I've now been back with my ex for 8 months and we're doing great. Tinder guy has completely left me alone since the week he confessed his undying love to me, and I've moved on. I'll never date online again. I'll never recommend dating online to anyone. What a wild ride. I wish I made up that story because it caused more than a few tears and several scary nights as I lived alone at a time and I didn't know how crazy Tinder guy really was. Maybe he'll kill my firstborn one day as retribution. Who knows? A date I will never forget. Honestly, I've never been a very open person. I've always been that super friendly and happy girl that seems like she has the perfect life, but no one really knows that deep. I think the only person who knows my entire story is my boyfriend, who is so great to me, and of course my little brother, who shared a lot of these experiences with me. There's a lot of things I have never had the courage to tell anyone, so here I am making my best effort. My parents got divorced when I was 5 years old and my younger brother was 2. This was really the beginning of everything falling apart for me. I know in this generation it's pretty common, but it was hard for a little girl who didn't understand why she had to go to mommy's one week and daddy's the next. I used to cry under my desk at recess and pray every night that they would get back together. My mom and I have never had a good relationship because of everything that has happened. She used to send me to school and daycare in shorts, no jacket, and sandals in the winter, not wanting my good clothes to go to my dad's. Keep in mind, I live in Canada. This is just one of the many things that led to the huge custody battle my mom started. My dad won and they settled on 50-50 custody, but my mom blamed a lot of it on me because I would email my dad telling him how much I missed him, and my mom took this as me taking his side. Of course, being so innocent, I always stuck up for her and thought everything was normal. My mom got remarried when I was 7. Her new husband was far from perfect. He supported us tangibly, but never emotionally. No matter how hard I tried, he was never proud of anything I did, and as a little girl, all I wanted was acceptance. He was also very aggressive, and we were terrified of him. My dad also had a girlfriend. She straight up neglected us. She had a child of her own who she barely had a relationship with. My dad worked night shifts as a refrigeration mechanic in order to support us, and she would lock herself in her room, refusing to talk to us when he was gone. I was around 7 or 8 years old when I started cooking dinner for my little brother and myself. I never told my dad because, again, I thought this was a normal thing. My dad was always telling me how he wishes my mom never gave up on him, and so he never gave up on his girlfriend, who he desperately believed could change for the better. Fast forward to 7th grade. I was 13 years old when my grandpa left my grandma and never told us. They had been married for about 30 years and he cheated on her. He moved out, never telling my brother and I, leaving us to think he was gone on a work trip and never came back. This was devastating, especially for me, because he was my best friend. My grandma became extremely depressed, having been with my grandpa since she was 16. We had to move in with her to help her take care of things, seeing as she had no idea how to do much. A few months later, my dad slipped and broke his ankle and then went to work and broke both arms. It was a year worth of surgeries and officially parenting my brother because my father physically couldn't. He had to quit his job because the nurse ended up being his ex-girlfriend who hated him, and there ended up being a malpractice which he didn't bother doing anything about. Being home all the time literally made him go insane. He developed so many mental health issues and ended up breaking up with his girlfriend. She was livid. She used to break into our house and we'd wake up to her doing dishes and stealing my clothes. No joke. One time we woke up to her in our shower, and when we tried to leave, she jumped on the hood of his car, butt naked. Fun times. She started hacking our phones and threatening my brother and I when my dad refused to give her his credit card information. Again, this affected his mental health, and he started developing diagnosed schizophrenia and extreme paranoia, along with his previously diagnosed anxiety, depression. A date I will never forget. Honestly, I've never been a very open person. I've always been that super friendly and happy girl that seems like she has the perfect life, but no one really knows that deep. I think the only person who knows my entire story is my boyfriend, who is so great to me, and of course my little brother, who shared a lot of these experiences with me. There's a lot of things I have never had the courage to tell anyone, so here I am making my best effort. My parents got divorced when I was 5 years old and my younger brother was 2. This was really the beginning of everything falling apart for me. I know in this generation it's pretty common, but it was hard for a little girl who didn't understand why she had to go to mommy's one week and daddy's the next. I used to cry under my desk at recess and pray every night that they would get back together. My mom and I have never had a good relationship because of everything that has happened. She used to send me to school and daycare in shorts, no jacket, and sandals in the winter, not wanting my good clothes to go to my dad's. Keep in mind, I live in Canada. This is just one of the many things that led to the huge custody battle my mom started. My dad won and they settled on 50-50 custody, but my mom blamed a lot of it on me because I would email my dad telling him how much I missed him, and my mom took this as me taking his side. Of course, being so innocent, I always stuck up for her and thought everything was normal. My mom got remarried when I was 7. Her new husband was far from perfect. He supported us tangibly, but never emotionally. No matter how hard I tried, he was never proud of anything I did, and as a little girl, all I wanted was acceptance. He was also very aggressive, and we were terrified of him. My dad also had a girlfriend. She straight up neglected us. She had a child of her own who she barely had a relationship with. My dad worked night shifts as a refrigeration mechanic in order to support us, and she would lock herself in her room, refusing to talk to us when he was gone. I was around 7 or 8 years old when I started cooking dinner for my little brother and myself. I never told my dad because, again, I thought this was a normal thing. My dad was always telling me how he wishes my mom never gave up on him, and so he never gave up on his girlfriend, who he desperately believed could change for the better. Fast forward to 7th grade. I was 13 years old when my grandpa left my grandma and never told us. They had been married for about 30 years and he cheated on her. He moved out, never telling my brother and I, leaving us to think he was gone on a work trip and never came back. This was devastating, especially for me, because he was my best friend. My grandma became extremely depressed, having been with my grandpa since she was 16. We had to move in with her to help her take care of things, seeing as she had no idea how to do much. A few months later, my dad slipped and broke his ankle and then went to work and broke both arms. It was a year worth of surgeries and officially parenting my brother because my father physically couldn't. He had to quit his job because the nurse ended up being his ex-girlfriend who hated him, and there ended up being a malpractice which he didn't bother doing anything about. Being home all the time literally made him go insane. He developed so many mental health issues and ended up breaking up with his girlfriend. She was livid. She used to break into our house and we'd wake up to her doing dishes and stealing my clothes. No joke. One time we woke up to her in our shower, and when we tried to leave, she jumped on the hood of his car, butt naked. Fun times. She started hacking our phones and threatening my brother and I when my dad refused to give her his credit card information. Again, this affected his mental health, and he started developing diagnosed schizophrenia and extreme paranoia, along with his previously diagnosed anxiety, depression, and ADHD. About a year later, he believed she was only threatening him with us because of him and thought hurting himself would save us. He tried to OD on his meds and ended up in the psych ward in the hospital. The doctors believe this did permanent damage to his brain. Of course, he was never the same after this. Because of the custody battle, I was always terrified my mom would take my brother and I away, and we'd never see him again if she knew anything relatively imperfect about him. So I hid everything from her, and she never knew he was in the hospital. The entire year we stayed with my grandma on his days, and she'd drive us to the hospital to visit him. He tried so hard to spoil us and would make crafts for us to bring home every time we came to see him. This was so difficult for me because I had to go to bed every night without being able to say goodnight to him, and I had to go to my mom's the next day and lie about it. About a year and a half later, he could come home. This was a big change, and he had a new girlfriend by this time who also ended up being crazy. Moving on about a year later, and he tried to hurt himself again, the day after my 15th birthday. This time, my brother and I were there. I remember him running up and down the stairs, angry, dazed, and refusing help. We called the police, and my brother and I hid upstairs under my bed in fear they would call Child Protective Services. Right below my room was the front door, and so we could easily hear everything. My dad refused to go with them, and they tased him to get him to cooperate. I remember his scream like it was yesterday. This was truly one of the hardest moments of my life. He ended up back in the hospital, and again, I had to lie. After 6 months, he was okay to come home. There were times where he asked me to sit in the closet until daylight because he swore someone would come hurt us. I was the only one he could talk to. My brother and grandma told him he was crazy, but I let him vent without fear of judgment. He was my best friend. He would come into my room and cry at 2 a.m., telling me how much he loved me and how sorry he was for putting me through so much. His happier days, he would come to my room and we'd bond over music. That was our thing, trying to impress each other with our new or old rap and R&B music we think we'd like. He supported every single thing I did, and as he could come to me without fear of judgment, I could do the same with him. He tried so hard, he was honestly the best dad I could have asked for. Yes, he put me through a lot, but I would do it over again if I could. November 10th, 2017, a date I will never forget. I was 17, turning 18 in 3 months to the day. I get to my dad's and my grandma is sitting with all my uncles on the couch. They all look devastated and I don't understand why. I put forms in my stomach and I start panicking, asking where my dad is. I start running around the house hoping to find him sleeping in one of the rooms, to no avail. The words, "I'm so sorry, your dad passed away this morning," along with the crack in my grandma's voice and tears in her eyes that follows, burns in my memory. My brother instantly starts screaming and bawling in pain, but I try not to react to make sure he's okay. I can't help but to start screaming myself. I collapse to the floor and begin rocking back and forth. I remember sitting up and saying, "You're joking, right?" about 10 times, hoping it was just some cruel joke. After that night, I became numb to the feeling. I couldn't cry. I went to the funeral a few days later with a straight face. I was so hurt that I couldn't cry no matter how I felt. My best friend was gone, and it was the most heartbreaking thing I've ever been through. His crazy new girlfriend accused me of not caring when he passed because I wouldn't give her his stuff, and then didn't show up to the funeral, proving how much she really cared. On God, I almost fought her. I ended up telling my mom everything about his mental health, to which she started resenting me for hiding for so long. This pretty much ruined our relationship, which is the reason I moved out, and with my current boyfriend about 6 months ago. Side story, I had a different new boyfriend at the time who came to the funeral with me. A week later, I caught him cheating on me. I'm now 18, and it has been almost 2 years since he passed. I moved out of my mom's because of our relationship. I live with my boyfriend, who I met in April 2018. Thankfully, I had an amazing support group who helped me get back on my feet. I'm attending university in the fall, have started my own small business, and am working full-time. Instead of allowing my devastation to victimize me, I use them to motivate me. We all have rough patches, but I am confident that as long as you are motivated and persistent in succeeding, you can, through anything. How religion took 16 years from my life. It feels weird to do this, but I wanted to tell my story to people who might understand. I'm not professionally diagnosed, but I definitely have deep emotional and mental problems. Please don't tell me to seek out professional help. I want to have therapy so bad. I know that I need help, but for now, it's not possible. Because if I would ask my parents, they would tell me I should pray to God and He would fix the phase I have. But I assure you, as soon as I get the opportunity to seek out professional help, without my parents knowing I'm going to. As long as that is possible, I'm trying to figure out what is going on with me on my own. I did so much research during quarantine because I started to question my sense of self, especially my identity, and ended up having an internal crisis. I thought my issues weren't that deep because I never was physically abused and technically everything in my life was fine. I had clothes, food, and an overall loving family on the surface. And I played it down because I thought someone like me can't call their experiences trauma because I was never hit nor bullied. Generally, people like me because I was a massive people pleaser and still do it, but it's gotten better. Or at least they were nice to me. My parents supported me, helped me out when I needed money for something, and now there are two parts of me fighting. The one part that knows exactly how hecked up I really am, and the other part that tells me I'm exaggerating, that I should stop overthinking and stop being ungrateful. I'm torn, and I hope to find at least one person who kind of understands me. I feel like no one could ever get me, because my trauma doesn't feel validated. Even though I found out that the part of the brain that is responsible for physical pain is also responsible for emotional pain. It still feels like I don't deserve to be heard, because on the surface, everything was perfectly fine, and even though I talked to friends about it and they really helped me, they still told me to be grateful that I was well-liked and no one directly hurt me. But I can't. I can't look at the positive aspects and live normally. It affects my life. It affects the person I am. It shaped me. I can't concentrate, and it got worse and worse with time. I have emotional outbursts that I learned to hide. I'm constantly on guard and don't feel safe in my house because I constantly think my parents could find out something that I'm hiding from them. I can never relax no matter where I am, except when I'm at my boyfriend's house and I know no one is going to be at home for a longer period of time. I feel like I'm not worth it. I feel ugly on the inside and outside, and I hate myself for coping by overeating. I'm not obese nor anything near it, but if I continue to eat how I eat without going to the gym, it could happen. I feel like I don't have to be the main mother figure to my sisters because my mom is so emotionally detached that I don't want them to think that what she does is real love. But the worst thing is how distant I feel from my emotions and myself. Does a myself even exist? Can I ever be it? I feel numbed out and drained, even though I do nothing all day but distract myself as good as I can. I feel like I never achieved anything and that I never will. Everything is so overwhelming and so hard to do, even the littlest homework or task. That's why I have a pile of work in my emails, and in the back of my mind that stresses me the hell out. But I just can't get myself to do it unless it has a deadline. And even then, I tend to at last minute. I feel weak, stupid, and misunderstood, and I think to myself, if that continues, all my good marks are going to drop. And then my parents are going to be a problem even on the surface. I'm doing my A-levels, class of 2021, in Germany. I was born here. Right now, and I just feel like I can't do it. And it is required from me that I get a prestigious degree, even though I would rather pursue a singing career. That was the longest introduction I ever wrote, but it needed to be at least written down somewhere. So what is the big deal? What am I complaining about? I'll try to create a chronological order and to remember everything crucial, but I yesterday realized that I'm missing blocks of time in my memories, even from recent times. It all started before I was born. My parents found each other through friends and got together. My mom lived in Kazakhstan before moving to Germany. I still don't exactly know why. And my father lived in Siberia before moving to Germany. His and my uncle's parents wanted to prevent them from having to fight in a war zone. And so they happened to live in the same city and they met. They got together and married. Then their neighbors invited them to go with them to a Russian-German evangelical church, and they ended up being members. Then I was born, and everything was perfect. I was in church every Sunday from the moment my mother could leave the hospital. I never knew anything different. And as soon as I was able to be separated from my mother for 2 to 3 hours, I was with other children my age while the adults were attending the big service. And then the indoctrination started. I don't remember much from my time in church, or the cult as I call it now, from the time before I was 12. I only remember my time in school, which is very odd to me, but what do I know? I just remember being a people pleaser from the start and everything they taught us, but there aren't many clear memories. I was good at being a people pleaser. Now it's easy for me to approach people and connect on a surface level, but at what price? It's scary to me that my memories are so blurry. I don't even know who I was friends with or if I even had friends before the age of 10. I just remember that I wanted to be perfect in God's eyes. I wanted to be the perfect example of a girl who loves Jesus with all her heart. I wanted people in church to look at me and think I will make it far in my faith. And I achieved that, I think. But now I hate my past self for caring so much. So what were we taught there? God created the world, Jesus died for my sins and resurrected after 3 days. The Bible is the only truth and the only way I must live. Everything else is the devil's work. And even though they didn't say it in particular, but that our church is the only one to teach the real truth, and that every other church doesn't have God in it and immediately leads to hell and damnation. We were taught that the secular world was highly dangerous, and as soon as we were not following one of God's, the church's, rules, we were open for demons to attack us. And to make it short, you could sin by thinking something. So we were taught to somehow control our thoughts, but give full control to God over every little aspect in our lives, because everything is predestined and we don't have control about anything anyways. But we're still responsible for our actions somehow, and we still have a free will granted from God. While writing this, I really understand how contradicting this is, and it was a core belief of mine. When an adult who looked after you as a toddler tells you this, and there are 500 people who all believed it wholeheartedly, you try to justify it until you really can't anymore. And then everything shatters. Losing faith is something that was so deeply intertwined with your whole existence. It's like part of you just died. Even though you know how ridiculous it was believing in it, and you still feel stupid for not realizing it earlier. So in a nutshell, everything bad you do is because you're not saved. Because for someone who is really saved, it's physically impossible to sin no matter how, and automatically fully your fault. But when you achieve something, it's because God did it. You're never capable of doing or achieving something on your own. You're even unable to think the right, good way. So you're basically nothing and unimportant. But when you come to God, He gives you a purpose He specifically chose for you. You matter to Him. You're worthy of His love. And even though we were taught He is forgiving to everyone and almost everything, if you only follow him everywhere he leads you. Another bizarre contradiction they teach little children: you're nothing, but with God, you're worthy. It makes me unbelievably mad that there are gradually more and more children who grow up believing this, who are taught that demons, the devil, and hell are around every corner to take them and torture them for eternity if they slip up one tiny bit. That's why I cried myself to sleep for years, begging God to forgive me for saying shit one time, or thinking in my head that I wanted to kiss a boy, not speaking of being attracted to a girl. Because of course anything than straight marriage within my church is wrong. Yes, I was expected to have a boyfriend within church, and if he was in the world, I had to convince him to go to church, and he has to love God. We weren't allowed to date before 17, and of course, no premarital sex, but they took it further to prevent it at all cost. You weren't allowed to be alone in a room with your significant other before marriage, so nothing could possibly happen. Holding hands and short hugs were allowed when engaged. So if you grew up there, find a boyfriend and get engaged as fast as possible, because if you fall in love, it must be in God's plan. Because you want to F and then marry as fast as possible, you have to be together at least a year and then be engaged for at least half a year to have your first kiss ever, if you weren't sinful, in front of everybody, and when the pastor says, you may kiss the bride. We were taught that God wants us to be pure and learn to value our partner's personality. They told us girls that if we had a sexual relationship before marriage, you would never know if he really loves you or just wants your body. And that every guy outside church would never love us for our personalities. Another contradiction. These young adults rush into marriage not because they think, wow, I really value my partner as a person. No, they're sex-driven teenagers lying to themselves, which is absolutely not their fault, of course. No one is appreciating anything, and if they are, they're very lucky, because there were maybe 15 people in your age range that you could end up with. Girls were also taught to save themselves because we are like chewing gum, and if you're all chewed up, your godly future husband wouldn't want you, would he? We were told we were pure glasses of water. And if we sleep around before marriage, or even with only one person, every time dirt would fall into our pure water. And no one wants to drink dirty water. But the one thing that stuck with me that my mother, and later on, more older woman, told me was every time you sleep with a man, he takes part of your soul with him. That's why there should be only one guy from the start, so that you don't end up losing your soul. The thought of that terrified me to the core, and I believed it. Now I know it's bullshit, but it was in my head constantly for 5 or 6 years. We were told to cover up so guys don't want sin with their eyes and thoughts. Knee-length skirts and shorts were allowed, and I always hated how they looked on me. And you had to cover your belly and your shoulders at all cost. Cleavage was obviously not allowed, and so weren't tight clothes, only skinny jeans, not leggings, especially when you had a little bit more chest. And if you dared to show a tiny bit of skin, no matter how hot summer was, even if it was accidental, you'd get in trouble. I was in that godforsaken building almost every day, except for Wednesdays where we would meet up with our local little group of girls. There was a leader a few years older than us, and I'm glad mine wasn't as controlling as others and didn't force me too much to work in different groups in church and discuss what our beloved, I could vomit remembering him and his sleazy and narcissistic behavior, pastor taught us on Sunday. I was involved in worship, and my love for singing kind of saved me because that's the only thing I really did because I myself wanted it. I danced, which was okay. It was workout for me and not dancing for God when I think about it. I looked after toddlers once a month during service with other women. I was in the theater group, and when there was an event for teenagers, I was responsible for leading a group of other teenagers to organize it, so everything was done and standing where it belongs. I liked organizing, so I was lucky they just positioned me there, but it was still hella stressful. And I played the piano, which I didn't really enjoy. So there were the basics. I was heavily involved. With 12, you move from being with children to the big service, and you're finally old enough to be part of all the cool things the teenagers did. But then you're also constantly stressed out, which worsened every year because obviously school got harder, but also the church demanded more and more, and suddenly you were thrown into highly responsible tasks, which drained you. When I was 14, I started constantly having headaches. I started drinking coffee because I was exhausted from not being able to sleep, being stressed out, and constantly worried that someone would find out my secrets. And now I need a very strong one for it to work. Because in school, I was someone else. I had a different name in my school, my real name. In church, the pastor required my parents to introduce me with a very faraway nickname from my real name because it sounded like a name in the Bible that an evil person had, and if I'd be called that, it would curse me. I did and said what I wanted. It increased gradually because I still tried to be myself, which you could be in church. No. In school, but obviously couldn't do that because no one can. I thought I was being myself in school, and maybe that was myself when I was 14, but I still was the most severe case of a people pleaser. And I always ended up in dependent, toxic friendships because I could never say anything against them. I had no one else who was close to me, so that also hurt me even though I didn't notice at the time. People abused my kindness because in church they told us we had to be nice, and I could do that at least. So I held on to being nice to everyone, helping everyone, and inviting people to come to church who were remotely close to me, which still embarrasses me the most, but you get in trouble when you're not inviting people. I'm so glad I was in a very accepting class. No one was ever really bullied, just mocked for a few things maybe, which I was, for being in that church. And they told me early on, it's a cult. You believe in crazy shit. Stop going there. But we were taught that people who were afraid of the truth always say that. School was kind of a safe place for me, even if I had toxic friendships and got hurt a few times, because we live about 25 kilometers away from church, the cult, and nobody I knew from there could see me. And even though we were taught that God could see everything and is always reading our thoughts, I didn't feel very watched. I was scared shitless when I wore something in school we weren't allowed to wear in church, and I thought I saw someone I knew, so I felt better in school than at home. And that's why my definition of home is something entirely different than that of people who grew up in an emotionally safe home. So what was living in my home like? I'm the first daughter of 3, and therefore my father's precious firstborn. I learned really fast that just keeping quiet, smiling, and doing what I'm told is the best way to avoid any more stressful situations. I hated every form of confrontation, and I still do. When I was young as 3, my father threatened to hit me with a belt, and did it a few times, but I stopped misbehaving or questioning, so no one yelled at me anymore, and no one told me to stand in a corner without looking. So I just learned to not show my emotions at all at home, because emotions cause trouble and distress. They also told us that. God and our own intellect, which is controlled by God, must lead us. Emotions come out because of the devil. My father was in control of everything, and to this day, he is still extremely sexist, racist, homophobic, transphobic, etc. You name it. And he still thinks I have exactly the same opinions as him. He is very critical of my boyfriend, but because he puts on a facade in front of my father as I do, my father likes him. My parents, more my father, still don't want me to have anything premarital, even though they are less strict than before. So yeah, I can't ask for birth control because then they would not let me see my boyfriend. As I said, my father is very controlling and has a very high opinion of himself. Because he is providing for our family, he doesn't have to do anything regarding the house. This is on the women and the 4 girls in the house, because that's what God made us for. Popping out babies, cleaning, and cooking. But I still have to get a degree and a high-paying job. And then I ask myself, what do you want from me? What? In church, we learn that you have to find a job that gives you enough time to be as active as possible in church, while giving birth to as many children as possible and managing your whole household completely alone, because your husband is by God's law above you and there to lead you. How remarkably generous of you to lead me, because I can't decide on anything ever due to always thinking I don't have control anyways. That's why I need to plan everything obsessively and always know and control what's going on. I idolized my father until the realization that we don't have any emotional bond slowly reached me until it hit me hard. I had to organize my phone a certain way and delete messages so in case he would want to go through it, he wouldn't find anything. He wanted me to be his perfect show daughter who has good marks and serves God with all of her existence, and he really did that. In front of him, I am what he wants me to be. I don't know what my mother wants. She just does what my father tells her and silently agrees to what he has to say. Maybe I learned to behave in that way because she did. I'm honestly sorry for her because she never had a chance to study anything that could make her independent because of moving to Germany at 17 or 18 and not being able to speak the language very well. I could cry because no matter how brutal this sounds, her life is over in a way. She is what I never want to be. Whenever they told us how our future will look like, I had a kind of panic that I never felt before. At the time, I suppressed that, but when I think back, my heart rate goes up and I feel like I need to run as fast as I can. And that's why I hate to be dependent on someone. But weirdly, I still end up in situations where I'm highly dependent. Another thing that I can maybe explain now is my reaction to my grandfather's death. He was more of a father to me than my own, and his wife's home, which I also deeply love, felt safe. When I was 11 years old, my grandmother, my grandfather's wife, passed away because of cancer. And I was never allowed to see her while she was sick, nor to attend the funeral. And in that time, I already saw my grandpa rarely. When my parents told me my grandma passed away, I cried one time. I know that I was sad, but I somehow can't recall my immediate emotions from that day. And I thought I'm glad that I still have my grandpa, but he passed away 3 months later, and I wasn't able to see him during those months. When my father emotionlessly told us that his father also passed away, I felt nothing. I didn't cry, no reaction at all, and then I didn't think about it for years. But when I was 14, all of a sudden, all of the emotions I should have felt when I was 11 crushed me harder than ever. It was like reliving the day I was told he was gone forever for almost a year, and I was so confused. Why now? Why didn't I feel anything back then? Because my brain was already way too stressed for an 11-year-old and just didn't process properly. Then 3 years later, something triggered my memories and the horrors began. When I was 16, it hit me again because I found out he committed suicide through my cousin. Back to the cult. So am I still there? No. My parents realized how manipulative literally everything about it was, and without telling anyone there, childhood friends I grew up with included, we went there one last time, and on Sunday, the 23rd of September, 2018, we drove away and never came back. And many others left too. We still meet every Sunday, and I still sing there because I don't want to confront my parents. I really don't want to be there because every time we're there, I'm not really there. I'm just a shell that moves around. During the preaching, which a few men do in turns, I'm always completely zoned out and can only concentrate for a bit if I really try. I don't know what that is or that means, but I absolutely hate it because I can't control it. And sometimes I'm just sad for no reason. I still can't sleep and still get a massive headache and can't stand up properly without strong coffee. I still eat too much stuff. I really shouldn't. And I feel bad for every little bit I eat, but I can't stop. And it also affects all of my relationships, especially with my boyfriend. He sometimes doesn't understand, but he still comforts me and is patient, which I'm really grateful for. And something that comes to mind only now is that my father used to completely lose it when I had a bad mark. I was afraid to come home and always started crying before even telling him. And then he would shout even more, beat the table with his fist and tell me to stop crying. Now I can control if I'm going to cry or not when something upsets me, and if I want to show my emotions or not. Being a very good liar was essential, and it still is. When my father is mad at me because I don't do the dishes, he still gets very impulsive and shames me because if he works and gives me food and clothing, it's just disrespectful to leave the dishes for too long. And when he stands beside me and doesn't stop while I do the dishes, I just nod my head and say yes. It's the only way to avoid more pain at all cost. There are these moments, but also the ones where he tries to talk to me and ask how I am, and then he tells me how he loves me, his firstborn princess. He tells me that I'm the best daughter someone could have, and that he's so proud of me. And I just smile at him and say thank you. But on the inside, I think, if you really knew who I really am and what I did that you don't have, you wouldn't talk to me anymore. He is proud of the daughter he created for himself that I still am in front of him. And also my mother tries to get closer to me after 16 years of distance and letting the church raise us. And the only thing I would tell her if I was honest for a few seconds in the midst of all the lies I protect myself with, I'm sorry, but it's too late. I don't have any emotional connection to my parents, and I never had. The first 16 years of my life were partly wasted. I felt like someone took my childhood from me. Even my memories are blurry. And I know it's technically not my parents' fault, but I want to blame them so badly. And it makes me so mad that I was born because of the church, because they convinced my father to have children. I was cursed before I even existed. And still, I can recall a few beautiful memories of things I did with my friends there. The sleepovers, summer camp, singing together, playing hide and seek in the big building. All of us connected through our fear of the dangerous outside world and hell. There is no moment in my life where I wasn't afraid that some adult could dream or feel. They taught us that God could reveal things about people to you when you have a strong connection to the Holy Spirit, that I was a dirty sinner that acted differently in school. And it was so frightening because when it's out that you messed up, you can't attend certain rituals like the Holy Communion, and that's when people know. They see that you're not taking part in it, and the first thing that comes to mind is, of course, premarital sex. When a couple did it and someone found out, it made sure by the authorities that in a week, everyone knows. And I wanted to avoid people thinking that at all costs, so I was very aware and on guard at all the time. I made sure I had a different app also open while watching Vampire Diaries on my phone, because there you could switch faster, so my mother or father, who still just burst into my room whenever they want to, would never know I would watch something the devil created. My parents and everyone in the church who was responsible for me always tried to shelter me and get anything with a bad influence away from me. But I still watched what I wasn't allowed to. The internet and myself raised me when my beliefs started to break away. People like Jenna Marble taught me things parents should teach their kids. I educated myself on so much stuff I missed out on and started to build my own opinions and morals from 14 to 16. Basic knowledge like it's okay to not believe what your parents believe was so new to me. And now I just want to move out and study something so I'm always safe. I can't wait for the day where I'm finally going to be financially independent and don't have to rely on my father. Wow, it feels so good to put that all in words. When you watch until now, you must be really, really bored. But thank you. I appreciate your attention greatly. Greatly. Greatly.
Hi, I'm Emma, and I live in a small city where people are not too much because I love to live a low-key life, and I so much love keeping to myself. My parents complained several times about this type of attitude that I've cultivated, but that's just me. So as time goes on, they have to take me for who I am. So they already know the type of girl I am, so they always let me be at all time. I'm so much quiet and reserved. I'm not the type of person who likes games or do too much on the daily activities, but I like reading novels and watching a lot of movies, especially comedy movies, because since I already choose to keep to myself, I have to find a means of catching fun by myself. I attend a high school class where students have the choice to do what they like and want. Whenever I'm in class, I'm always reserved and quiet, always. But I do have friends who always love to force words out of my mouth whenever they are around me. I love going to school every day, if not for anything but for the sake of seeing my friends, because I will surely talk whenever I'm around them. On this beautiful morning when I got to class, I noticed a letter was dropped inside my locker, which was so unusual. I decided to open the letter after the class, but while the teacher was in class teaching, all my mind was on was the letter that was dropped inside my locker. Immediately when the teacher left the class, I opened it, and what I discovered was a love letter, which I did not know who dropped it there. I tried to pay so much attention to every guy I came in contact with in class so as to get who dropped the letter, but it was not too available. After a long period of staying in class during the break hour, my friends came to my seat to meet me, and then they all said we should go outside to get something. On our way out, some guys came our way, and trying to get our attention at first, I looked at all of them, thinking maybe it might be one of them that cultivated the habit of dropping the sticky note inside my locker. But with all their facial expressions, I don't think any of them can do such. They tried stopping us, not moving any step out of there, and all we just have to do is to comply. But all of a sudden, a teacher decided to come our way. Then immediately they noticed that the teacher was coming our way. They all left instantly, and we proceeded in getting what we wanted to go by. I told my friends about the sticky note I discovered inside my locker that morning, and they all laughed at me, saying maybe a guy has been stalking me all this while. They then said that one of us should try coming to school very early so that the guy can be caught. But that guy that dropped the sticky note is just too smart and expert. We tried for days, but we could not get the guy, so I told the ladies to forget the issue, that I'm very sure that one day he will surely reveal his identity. As time goes on, it became a regular routine. Every blessed morning when I get to my seat, I will surely find a sticky note with a love quote inside my locker. At some point, I got annoyed and frustrated, but there's no point yelling because I did not know who was doing such a thing. So I decided to stomach it, and I did not tell it to anyone. One day during school hour, a teacher at school was explaining to us a physics experiment, and he made it as a game because he wanted all the students to participate and be carried along. During this process, all students participating closed their eyes and tasted, perceived, and some liquids to tell what it is based on their taste. It was quite fun because all students were carried along for the first time at school, and we all laughed where someone guessed wrong because we all gave various answers, knowing fully well that our tasting boards are different. I really enjoyed the class that day because it was so much different. The following day in class was Friday, so a group of people in class came together and discussed that we should have a get-together party on Saturday, which is the following day. So they asked the whole class about their opinion concerning the party. To my surprise, everyone was happy to hear that they all turned in. Well, as for me, having a get-together party on Saturday, though the plan was a little bit awkward to me, because I don't really like associating myself with things like that, because I so much love keeping to myself. A venue was picked, and all planned was so fascinating and lovely. Actually, I love the plan because I want to see how it will look for the first time by the beach side, so I decided to hang out that day. When I got home that day, I told my mom about the plan of going to the beach the following day. She was so happy to hear that because she's never seen me going out before. So that night, my mom came into my room and went directly to my wardrobe to select the clothes I will be putting on the following day. When it comes to selecting clothes for an event, my mom is very good at it, and she so much loves me looking good and cute, always. So the day finally came. I woke up so late, maybe because I slept late checking out the clothes my mom was picking for me to wear. I had to rush to the bathroom to have my bath so as to dress up to meet with the event, knowing fully well that I'm late already. After having my bath, I dressed up, looking cute and pretty for the event. After dressing up, I set out for the party immediately. So finally, I got to the venue a little bit late. And trust me, just as planned, all eyes were on me, because I was so much looking gorgeous and pretty. After getting there, a guy named Sean in my class ran towards me to give me a long hug and a peck. After he did that, I was so shy to take a step away from where I was standing. But from the look of things, he's been a long-time crush. Throughout the party, Sean was all over me, because that will be the first time he will have the opportunity of talking to me and expressing himself. We both have a walk together, and he told me a lot of things about me which I was so surprised to hear. Then I knew he has been the guy stalking me. Actually, Sean has been the guy dropping all those sticky notes with love quotes under my locker. At first, when he told me he was the one, I was so mad with him. Then I told him that he's a coward. If not, he would have come to me himself and not by note. Then he said he did not know what I was going to say because he did not want to be too forward. Then we both smiled and laughed together. Then we moved on with the party. We hung out and made a walk through a beach and had fun, and then we all decided to go to a friend's apartment. So a small group of us went into the apartment, and here comes the idea to play a blind taste game, similarly with a game we once played at school. I was so anxious to play the game, but at the same time, I didn't want to join. I simply refused, but then I thought of it that I am the one who is really good in tasting things and smell very good, so I later decided to participate in the end. So as usual, the game started and was getting more interesting and fun, but still yet throughout this period, Sean did not leave my side for once. Well, he might be thinking he might not have this type of opportunity again. So everyone's turn during the game came and went, and here it comes my turn. So a guy closed my eyes and pushed my head towards the object. So I tried to perceive the object. I was not getting it. Then I tried touching it with my nose. At first it was a strong object as I touched it with my nose a bit and said, "It's a pen," as it does not smell at all. They all smiled. And then I was wondering what could it be. I then gave another try, but the object this time was softer. I was then surprised, thinking within me, maybe the object has been changed. But then I asked if they changed the object, and changing the object is outside of game rules. They all said no, that it's still the same object, and I thought, what could it be? But I had no answer. After a little moment of thinking, I grabbed the object with my hand to know what the shape of the object looks like. Then I feel it was a tall object, similar to cylinder, and I immediately opened my eyes. I was so much afraid because it is something inappropriate. When I opened my eyes, what I saw was simply a banana, which was so different to what I felt when my eyes were closed and everyone was laughing at me. I was annoyed, and only Sean could notice it then. He came to walk me home. He explained to me that it was a banana, but still yet, I disagree. I just told him to close the discussion. When I got back home, I greeted my mom with a weird look on my face. Then I went straight to my room. She gave me some minutes to be by myself before she came to meet me. Then she asked me what happened at the party. Then I narrated everything to her, not leaving behind the aspect where Sean came to give me a long hug and a peck. She told me not to be annoyed about the game, though I have forgotten about how I felt during the game period because the thought of Sean is now all over me. So Mom asked me to gist her about Sean. So I did, and we all laughed and I was happy all through the night. When I got back to school, I discovered that I did not see the sticky note as usual. Then I looked straight down to Sean's seat, and then I saw him smiling. Then I laughed as feel. So the class started and immediately the teacher came in. Then every other student told the teacher about everything that happened to me at the party, and they laughed. But then the teacher said to me, he will call me one day and tell me a secret behind this game. Then he left the class, but within me I am still not sure if the object was banana at first, or they changed the object during the game, as it softened and changed, and I am still confused, and I will never play that game again. This is the reason why I didn't want to participate in the game earlier. See what it all turns out to be? Please let me know in the comments if you think they've changed the object, or am I just thinking wrong?
Gorgeous girl. Junior, 17 years old. Math. Third hour. I walk into my new class like I did for all my new classes. Nothing special, but I was lucky enough to get 5 to 6 of my friends sitting around me. Most of that class was spent playing video games on our laptops because our teacher was just awful at teaching. Almost as if he tried to teach assuming that the class already knew the material. Like what? How are we supposed to know how to do the problem if you've only shown one example and had already erased it? Ugh, he sucked. I could write a whole post about only him, but I have to stay on track because it's about to get interesting. This class was full of a whole range of students, so I'd probably say there were 4 groups that would stick together and talk. The room was kind of separated in quadrants. Our group was in the back far corner and consisted of jocks, a few gamers, and not to sound self-centered, but I would say more quote-unquote popular kids. Not that it matters much, but, well, actually, yeah, that's kind of important, so remember that. To our left were a few of the rednecks and louder kids, but just between each other so they didn't disrupt class or anything. In front of us were kids that were pretty quiet and focused more on math than talking. And finally, in front of us were this group of girls who were all kind of feminists with a few super feminists. When I say super feminist, I mean 2 of them literally said they hate men and white people, so I don't know what else to tell you. These girls were all pretty cool, besides when it came to the political stuff. But I wouldn't say we were really friends with these girls. Well, I guess most of them. There was this one girl who I'll call R that sat right in front of me. R was absolutely gorgeous, so me being me, I would often ask her for a pencil or a question so I could talk to her. She didn't seem to be as enthusiastic about me as I was about her, but I thought maybe I wasn't on my game or something. I was 17. Give me a break. We were also in totally different cliques, so we didn't know each other very well. I had heard things about her and obviously knew her name, but that was pretty much it. Everyone said she was really nice and sweet, and man, did she live up to it. The days went on, but this little thing never grew past classmates. R was just the girl that sat in front of me. Every day I'd go to class, maybe say hello, find my seat, and that'd be it. She wasn't any more than an acquaintance, and that was fine with me. One day I came into class, and sitting in my seat was this girl who I hated and immediately started arguing with me about political stuff. What was the argument about, you ask? Not important. The thing was, though, that this little back and forth turned into a 5 versus 1 when all her friends joined in. Unfortunately, I was the only one in my friend group in my class that day, so I was getting cornered fast. Even my math teacher was getting into it. As tensions rose, so did the emotions. The argument was growing uncontrollably and eventually veered off into a path that had a lot to do with depression and anxiety. This topic was super sensitive for me because I was on medication and hadn't told anyone about it. I'd like to say that at most 3 people knew and swore never to tell. I did a pretty good job of hiding it, so when they started talking to me about the subject like I was some ignorant a-hole, I got pretty upset. This is the moment that R started talking and was being super defensive, and she seemed really knowledgeable of the subject. That didn't change the fact that we were just going off at each other. Gosh darn, that girl really ticked me off. She made everything I said seem like I didn't care about people on medication. Eventually, the argument led to me saying something along the lines of, "You shouldn't have to depend on pills. They should just help your bettering process." R took it as something completely different, thinking I said, if you take pills, then you aren't really you. She took it really, really hard and called me some names and broke down crying. Stunned, I stopped myself from saying too much more because it took me back so much. I'd never seen R so full of emotion, so I knew maybe I hit a little too close to home for her. I've made girls upset before, but not like that. The arguing stopped pretty soon after, and soon the bell rang. Everyone got up and simply went to their next class. On to something else like nothing had ever happened, but not for me. I was feeling weird about the whole situation for the day and couldn't even really sleep. Is she depressed too? I asked myself. I never met anyone else who struggled with what I did. The next day, I woke up with it on my mind, so I knew I had to fix the little mess I made. When I came to class the next day, something was different. The seat in front of me was now empty. R had requested to change seats so I could no longer just tap her shoulder like I used to. This little variable was enough for me to leave it alone. I figured if she couldn't even sit by me, then she sure as hell doesn't want to talk to me. This continued for like 2 weeks before I couldn't stand it anymore and finally decided to message her about it. The weird thing was, when I asked her about it, she said she didn't even remember the argument. I'm not the brightest, but I know you don't just forget a moment with a heightened emotion like that. I wanted to press, but instead, I told her to forget about it. Things weren't ever the same with us, and we were left instead with this awkward, hate-filled aura that floated around us when we were around each other. I figured that was all it was ever going to be. Or so I thought. Fast forward to the start of senior year, the very first day. I was pretty excited and ready for all my new classes. Each class was filled with more and more of my friends all the way up to my last class, foods/nutrition. It was 2 hours long. As I waddled in a little late, and in front of me were only a few tables to sit at, 3 of the 5 of them were completely full and had a few people I knew, so I was kind of screwed. I looked to my left. There sat 2 super weird kids I did not get along with. Guess that's not an option. I looked right towards the last table and see 2 girls I don't really know, so I start heading that way. But at the last second, I had noticed I must not have seen the third person at the table. It was R. Immediately, I turned around, thinking there's no way in hell I'm going to sit by her. Realizing the other table was possibly the worst seat in the history of the world, I looked down, sighed, turned, and sat down at R's table. You could actually feel the uncomfortableness as we made eye contact and both looked down. That's exactly my luck to be put in the situation. Then guess what? The teacher tells us that we'd better like our seats because they are permanent. Wow. We were both unhappy, but there was nothing to be done. All there was to do was to suck it up and get over it. As days went past, our little frizz sort of died out a little. We definitely still hated each other, but started talking again. We were at the same kitchen for cooking too, so we didn't really have a choice. Our conversations eventually grew more and more until one day something happened that changed everything. Our class often had times to go on your computer and do things like a worksheet or something. While I worked, I always had music playing in my headphones. Always. I didn't listen to what everyone else did though, and it kind of sucked. Actually, no. It really sucked. Listening to punk rock music wasn't really common. I liked bands like With Confidence, Sleeping with Sirens, All Time Low, and a few others. It was hard finding music like that when no one I knew actually liked it. I mean, there were songs that I would show my friends and they'd end up liking it, but never felt like someone actually had the same taste in music as me. I'm a hopeless romantic, so don't cringe when I say I've always dreamed of meeting that girl that likes my music and is, like sort of a badass and just understood exactly what that kind of music does to you. But let's push that thought aside. It was just some backstory for what's coming up. I had to start a new paragraph because thinking about it just gave me the chills. Sorry, I'm writing this trying to get all that stuff that goes through my brain. I don't know why I tell stories like this, but if you've made it this far, then maybe it's not too bad. Nothing was out of the ordinary on that day. It was boring and just kind of, there. 2 hours left is all I could think. I was already sick of school and each day was getting worse. Teacher says to us that we have free time to work on homework, so I pull out my computer and immediately grab my headphones. The homework was table-based, so we had to work together, and at this point, R being at the table didn't bother me much, so I decided to ask her for help. She looked a little confused. We didn't really talk at this point, but still. She helped me anyways. A few minutes in, I noticed she had headphones in too. I hesitated and asked her what she was listening to. She almost hesitated too, seeming embarrassed. I smiled a little smile, and she was like, "Well, they aren't that popular, so you might not know any of their songs." I peeked over and took a look at the screen. It might sound stupid and not that big of a deal, but seeing her playlist and knowing almost all of the songs, I could not believe it. I looked at her and I was like, "What? You know these bands?" Her eyes locked with mine and she said, "You know these bands?" I don't even know how to put it into words. It was like lightning. The rest of that class, we showed each other song after song after song, talking about them and pointing out the best parts only pushed us deeper and deeper into our own little bubble. We had been so lost in each other that sure enough, the bell goes off and we didn't even notice. We were both taken a little off guard, so we just sort of hurried and went home. I couldn't even sleep that night because the rest of my night, she was all I could think about. I mean, where can I even start? This girl drove me crazy all this time, and all of a sudden, this? I eventually fell asleep, and all I remember the next day is being crazy nervous. What if I tried to talk and she didn't care anymore? I guess I didn't mind much since we didn't really like each other, but as soon as I got there, it picked up just where we'd left off. R said something to me though that I'd never forget. Once we got back into music, she had this frustrated look on her face when I showed her a new song. Apparently, she'd already heard the song and really liked it. Then out of nowhere, she goes, "Ugh, why does it have to be you that likes all this music?" At that moment, I knew she was thinking the exact same thing I was. I had a dumb smile on my face for so long after that. Each day got more and more interesting. I learned that she used to think that I was a major a-hole who only cared about myself, and I told her I thought she was a B, so it actually worked out kind of well. Every time she opened her mouth, it was like angelic music I couldn't get away from. Whether we were sharing headphones to hear new music, or even just nonstop laughing about something dumb in the kitchen, there wasn't a single dull moment with her. It even got to the point where I actually wanted to go to school in the morning. The days where she was absent felt so empty to me. It was so disappointing, and I think the other girls even noticed it too. I always wondered if she felt the same way when I was gone. There's no way a girl like that would think of me like that, I thought to myself. I kept asking myself this until I learned that I was taking a class trip and was going to be gone for a few days. The day before the trip, I said to my table that I'd be gone for 2 days, and R immediately had a face of just, I don't know really, sadness? It was so genuine, and she was like, what? No. But tried to play it off right away after. I smiled at her, and she looked back, and it was like we could read each other's minds. From that point on, I knew we were both in the situation of being drawn to each other with nothing that we could do about it. I never officially said it, but I had the biggest crush on this girl, and I think she had one on me too. There was only one thing that was keeping us apart, something that was way more than enough for either of us to act on. She had a boyfriend. She started dating him in the summer, and they were pretty in love. This guy had been her first everything, so I knew it wasn't some random schlub. Honestly, the guy was kind of a D to her. He'd come to class, pull her shirt up if her cleavage was showing, and just sort of talk down to her. You could see it in her eyes when he hurt her, and it was hard to watch sometimes. I wanted to try to comfort her, but I knew it was pointless. I think he caught on to me and her talking and would stand in between us, even halfway through our conversation, so we'd have to stop. I tried to say as much as I could to her before he'd come to her at the end of class. He was usually the end to our fun every day, but I didn't mind. Even talking with her for a minute made my day. Remember how I said R was really sweet? Well, she was, but she had a side to her I never knew about. Our teacher sometimes played favorites and would let some kids on their phones and others not. On this day, she decided that R was the one to not be on her phone. In less than a second, R had this fire in her that I could almost feel just by looking at her. She snapped back and they got into an argument that lasted only a few words. Those arguments started occurring often, and to be completely real, they made me like her even more. I'd argue with a teacher or two if I knew they were being unfair, and apparently she did too. I don't think I've even told her that I liked it, which sucks, but there's not much I can do now. As the semester drew to an end, I realized things with this girl would never turn into anything. I had gotten a girlfriend, her boyfriend and her had gotten even closer, and we weren't going to see each other in class anymore. The days that we had were incredible, but at the same time so depressing because we both knew that it was going to end. I don't know how we both knew, but somehow we did. As we said our goodbyes, I'd always hoped maybe it wasn't our last goodbye, that maybe once, just once, we'd be able to talk again. I haven't talked to her since, and it's been about 3 years. Although we didn't talk, I never lost hope. I saw her at a party about a year after, but we didn't talk to each other. I looked up to see if she was looking at me a few times, but she never was, so I didn't think to approach her. As a hopeless romantic, I thought to myself, maybe it was like one of those movie scenes where I look up, and as I look away, she looks, and we never get to have the connection I was dying for. That R wants just as bad as me to look. I wish I knew the answer to that, but I don't know if I ever will. I still listen to the songs she showed me and wonder if she listens to mine. I'm left sitting here with this empty feeling, and I don't know what to do with it. I guess that's why I went to Reddit to let go of my thoughts and quit bottling everything up. So yeah, that's basically my story. A guy and a girl who hated each other that never thought they'd end up being friends. I know it doesn't have a happy ending, but not every story is a fairy tale. Maybe one day, but not today. I wish today. She made my heart melt in a way I'll never forget. And that's enough for me.
Mom, there's one in every high school, an activity that everyone does for months on end, a fad everyone talks about, and if you aren't doing it, you don't get to participate in the conversation. I'm not talking about drugs or sex, I'm talking about scaring each other. For months in my high school, all anyone could talk about was the haunted houses they visited over the weekends. Jeff floated up the stairs. You could hear the woman crying out for her children. I called bullshit on all of their stories. Even the ones people clearly thought they experienced, figuring it was faulty wiring or old houses settling. I wasn't too interested in their stupidity, but little did I know I was about to experience things for myself, unwillingly. I'm from a very small town in the upper Midwest. My childhood home was literally in the middle of nowhere. Our closest neighbor was about a mile away. The home I grew up in until I was 14 was a rental. Then my parents bought some land and moved a huge old Victorian farmhouse onto it. The house hadn't been occupied in several years, probably decades. The last person who owned it wanted it off his property so the cows could roam free on the land. I still don't know when the house was built, but the original basement had a sign that it was 1909 was the year they installed the furnace, so sometime before that. After the house was moved, there were some repairs that needed to be done before we could move in. It was months before we were able to put anything into it. The first night we actually got to stay there was when I realized my family was not the only ones living in it. My parents picked me up from a school function late on a Saturday. The new house was kind of on the way to the old house, so when my dad turned on the road to go to the new house, I asked, "Where are we going?" To which my dad just smiled. I kindly reminded him that I had the clothes on my back and nothing else to say at the new house. We took a detour back to the old house, grabbing the essentials: toothbrush, pajamas, books, posters. We headed back to the new house. I spent the remainder of my evening putting up the posters I had saved from numerous magazines of cute boys and even cuter animals. I hadn't put them up in the old house, not wanting to rip them down to put in the new house. I listened to music and set up my room for a while before going to bed. Before I go any further, I need to give you a layout of sorts of this house. There are 4 levels: basement, main floor, upstairs, attic. The basement is basically a large living area with the laundry area, no bedrooms down there. The main level is kitchen, dining room, fancy living room, small bathroom. Upper level is 4 bedrooms with the second full bathroom. Attic is a big open space. My parents gave me the option to have my bedroom in the attic or have the master bedroom on the second floor since I would be moving out in a few years. I chose the actual bedroom because I want the closet. The attic never creeped me out. I seriously considered taking it as my room, but I'm a closet girl. What could I say? When you walk up the stairs to the left is my sister's room and my room because they are both the biggest. On the right is a smaller spare bedroom, my brother's room, and the bathroom between the 2 rooms. The hallway is very wide, and at the end of the hallway is a door to the upper level of the porch. When we first moved in, there was no porch yet, so the door led to a long drop onto a rocky driveway. The master bedroom is huge, almost a perfect square. Since I had not been able to set up my room that day, my sister and her friend set it up for me. They put my dresser by the door, the desk by the window, and the bed on the opposite side of the room from the door. They did a pretty good job. I just had to personalize it, so I turned on some music and shut my door so anyone trying to sleep wouldn't hear. My brother's room is right across the wide hall from mine. His bed was right next to his bedroom door, and his door was cracked open just a bit. By the time I went to bed, everyone else in the house was sleeping. I was just falling asleep in my new bed at the new house when I woken by a whisper. "Mom, Mom." Like when you're little and you wake up in the middle of the night to find you wet the bed or thrown up all over yourself, so you go get your mom and whisper right next to her ear. That's what I heard. I opened my eyes to see nothing. I had cracked open my bedroom door just a tiny bit to allow the hall light to seep in, just in case I woke up and needed to use the bathroom without having to turn on the lights. My closet door was also open about 3 inches. There was no one there who could have whispered. Confused, I fell back asleep thinking it was probably my brother who woke up and being 7 in the new house for the first time was disoriented about what was going on. I didn't say anything to anyone at first, but after I thought more about it, there was no possible way I could have heard my brother whisper from that far away. I couldn't stop thinking about the strange whisper and who it could have been. Also, I'd like to remind you, I now occupy the master bedroom where my parents of the previous family most likely slept. Finally, I told my mom. To my surprise, she didn't dismiss me or tell me I was hearing things or that the house was probably settling. She paused just a second, most likely trying to decide if I was mature enough to handle what she was about to tell me, and said, "I've heard it too." The Silhouette. If you've watched Mom, great. If you haven't, I highly recommend watching it before this to have a better understanding of the situation. All of the events I'm about to describe all happened. For real. To me and my family. It's okay if you don't believe it. I honestly wouldn't either if I was hearing it. I never believed any of the stories from my friends that had experiences. They all seemed like bullshit. I'm still skeptical when I hear some stories. They seem a little too far-fetched or exaggerated for entertainment. Not mine. These are 100% true accounts of what happened. Now, I don't know how the ghost world works. Maybe they're in another dimension. Maybe they could think they're still living. Maybe they could see or sense us all the time, or maybe just at certain times. Our ghost wasn't always around, but he sure made his presence known as soon as there was activity in the house. It hadn't been occupied in decades, so maybe this little kid ghost had been alone for so long, and now all of a sudden there are people around again and he's trying so hard to get our attention. It makes me a little sad to think about it. At 14, you're pretty susceptible to everything around you. Friends, family, movies, and TV. As my mom was studying the look on my face, trying to decide if I should know the whole story, I'm sure these thoughts went through her mind. Does she want to scare the shit out of me, or should she just leave it alone and let me figure things out for myself? She chose option A. I also think she was relieved someone else had experienced something, so she wasn't alone and thought she was just hearing strange voices. She had been under a lot of stress to get the house ready for her family to live in, staying up well into the night at the house, got up to get us ready for school, still had a job, and took at least 2 hours out of every day to do some sort of cardio. She was superwoman. No wonder she may have thought she was just hearing things. Lack of sleep alone will do that to a person. In the winter, my mom rode her stationary bike in the living room after we all went to school. It was loud and obnoxious, so she had to turn on the TV up to a ridiculous volume to be able to hear it over the bike. This was why she preferred to be at home alone when she rode it, so she didn't disrupt everyone else in the house. This was when my mom heard the whisper, "Mom, Mom." She heard it over the loud bike and the loud TV. She paused everything to listen. Completely alone in the house and knowing she was, it was quite a shock. She didn't hear it again, so she kept writing. This is what she told me after I told her I had heard it. Then she said there was more. Over the winter was when she would go to work on the house. Winter in the Midwest means it's dark by 5 p.m. We're used to it, no biggie. So one night, my mom, exhausted, goes to leave the new house to go home to bed. She's driving away from the house down the driveway when she notices she left the upstairs hall light on. She stops the car to go back in and turn it off when she notices something strange. There's someone in the window up there. It appears to be the silhouette of a small child's head and fingers peeking out through the window in the door, as if the child isn't quite tall enough, so they're standing on their tiptoes, gripping the frame to see what's outside. My mom didn't go back in to turn off the light. That was the first sighting. The second was a couple months before we moved into the new house. My parents met with some friends at a bar. They happened to run into the electrician who worked on the house before we moved into it. He had quite the story for them. If my parents were working on the house, it was open and unlocked. You could get from the basement to the attic, no problem. When my parents weren't there, but crews were working on it, they only had access to the basement. The electrician was making a few changes and checks one evening, making sure all was working properly. He had been in and out of the basement, looking at lights and whatnot. He was outside making sure the yard light was going to come on once it got dark enough, and happened to look up at the house and see the silhouette of a child in an upstairs bedroom. He was there alone with no crew members or their children, and didn't even have access to the main level, let alone the second floor. He was clearly shaken up by it and was relieved when my mom said she had also seen a similar silhouette in the window of the door at the end of the hall. He said it wasn't in the hall window, it was in the bedroom to the right. My bedroom. Elliot. So it's been a while since I've been able to continue my story. Sorry. If you're seeing this part for the first time, you should probably go back and watch Mom and the Silhouette, because this might not make any sense if you don't. If you had watched them both, you are aware of the child haunting the home I grew up in. He's been spotted and heard. Now I'd like to tell you about a little research my mom did after I told her about the creepy whisper I heard the first night we stayed here. I mentioned my parents moved the house onto some land they purchased. The previous owner was an elderly man who ended up in hospice care, unable to carry on a conversation for too long. When my mom went to visit him, she realized she was not going to get very far by talking to him. He couldn't even remember who she was. No biggie, there are records and death certificates, right? Well, sort of. She ended up finding a small cemetery near the location the house was originally standing. It was a small family one, overgrown and hard to find, but there was a grave that was marked Elliot. The marker said the child died at 6. That seemed about right. A 6-year-old would behave the way our ghost was behaving. But why had Elliot died? In the early 1900s, kids died in their sleep because of numerous things that doctors back then didn't even know about. Simple diseases we're now vaccinated for were terminal back then. Sad, I know. Not completely satisfied with her findings, my mom headed to the library to see what else she could find. Records weren't kept as well as they are today back then, but she did find something. There was a small obituary on a child named Elliot who was said to be about 4 years old. Okay, now what are the chances of a child around the same age, with the same name, dying around the same time on the same property? I think someone messed up on the age or year Elliot died. Either way, Elliot didn't go where they were supposed to go. Not knowing if Elliot is a boy or girl, I have a feeling he's a boy, so from here on, I will call him a he. My mother had to be content with her search for the time being. There are now no living relatives to ask, so we have to rely on records even though there may not be totally accurate. It's a bummer. I'm curious about this child. Why is he still here? What does he need? How can we help him? I have no idea. Not that I didn't try. After that first night of hearing him whisper, I kept the closet door closed, not wanting him to wake me up again. I spent a few evenings in my closet on a beanbag chair trying to talk to him and getting no response. I had some luck with the Ouija board at a friend's birthday party once. I suppose you like to hear that story, and since it's somewhat relevant, here, I'll tell you. My best friend from childhood had lost her grandmother to a heart attack very suddenly when we were in 4th grade. As a 4th grader, those things aren't understood fully like they are when you're older. It really hit her a few years later when she finally realized what had happened, and she got super bummed she hadn't been able to say goodbye. That's when one of us suggested a spirit board. What's the worst that could happen? In our case, her grandma can visit us, and that's exactly what happened. Throughout the night, I had been constantly pulling my hair behind my ear when my grown-out bangs got in my face. Typical 13-year-old, but I wasn't able to push them out of my face since my fingers were glued to the planchette where we were summoning the spirit. I was looking down at the board waiting for words to be spelled out when my hair was gently scooped out of my face and placed behind my ear, much like a grandmother would do for her granddaughter. After what seemed like several minutes, I looked at my friend who was crying. We all immediately took our fingers off the board to console her. Admittedly, a little freaked out, my friend said she was able to say goodbye to her grandma because she had appeared in the corner and smiled at her. She was the only one who saw her, but I told her she had put my hair back behind my ear for me. She had been a wonderful lady, and it wouldn't have been out of the ordinary for her to do that for me. That was before my encounter with Elliot. If my only other spiritual experience had been a less pleasant one, I may have been more apprehensive about the whisper. And since it had been a successful one, I decided to have some friends over and try it myself. We got nothing. Not even a glimmer. Maybe it's because he wasn't related to any of us, or he was just hiding or shy. We will never know. I didn't hear him again while I lived there. That doesn't mean he didn't announce his presence. But that's another story for another day. Keep creepin', peeps. How losing my mother saved my life. My mother died a little over 2 years ago on October 31st of 2016. It was sudden and sort of unexpected. But then when does one look at death as expected? I digress. Apologies, reader, I tend to ramble. Kudos to you if you get to the end, and it's a bit of a long, painful story, but I feel it's important as well as therapeutic to tell. I moved away from my family, my mom especially, since she and I were the closest, about 3 years ago. My mom was of course sad to see me go, but knew it was best for my family. So I moved, and unbeknownst to me, my mother neglected her own health to care for my asshole male DNA donor and my autistic but amazingly intelligent younger brother. So she got sick. Really sick. Like rushed to the hospital and into the ICU kind of sick. I'm my mother's POA, so I was notified, and she called me to tell me not to panic. So I panicked. Big time. She tells me she had a hard time breathing one day, so my brother tried to convince her to go to the ER. And it got so bad that she got scared and called 911. Saved her life. For a little while. Turns out my mother had a severe case of pneumonia. She smoked. I had suspected for years she had COPD, and she knew but wouldn't tell me. So okay, pneumonia. I work in the medical field. I know it's serious but treatable, and she's obviously doing okay if she's calling me, right? Except at the end, she drops the bombshell. They found cancer on her chest CT. My mother had cancer. That was the first time in the next few weeks my world would shift on its axis. This was October 10th. So I cry and I freak out, but when the nurse takes over and I start asking about stages, type, treatment plans, scans, etc., she was very vague, but told me it was bad. She had met with an oncologist and was going to do chemo. So I relaxed a little, figured it was gonna suck, but we would get through this. The next weeks went by in a blur. I spoke to my mother daily, usually on my ride to work to see how chemo went, how she was feeling, etc. I had made a trip home 2 days after I found out, thanks to some amazing friends and family that helped me and my husband get there. So I laid eyes on her, judged for myself how bad I thought it was. I called her after her chemo appointment, Thursday, October 27th. She was feeling okay, but very tired, so we didn't talk long. I could recall exactly where I was on my drive and what song on Pandora I paused to talk to her. Her last words to me were "bless you for ringing." My mother was British and very verbally proper, so that was her typical goodbye. I hung up from that call not knowing that that would be the last time I heard her voice. Everything was going okay from then up until October 29th. My world shifted again. I got a frantic email from my brother. He doesn't like phones, stating our mother was in the hospital and something about papers that if her heart stopped again, that they couldn't restart it and I needed to call the hospital. So I have a feeling of absolute dread sinking in. It's 10 o'clock at night. What is going on? I call the hospital and find out she is in the ER. Okay, she got sick. Let's talk to charge to find out why. I actually got to talk to the ER doctor that told me my mother was intubated and unconscious in the ER. Cue panic attack. My mother had gotten sick at home, vomited, and we think she aspirated or inhaled her vomit. Bad times. My poor brother called 911 and they came to their house and resuscitated her. But she had suffered brain damage or something because she wouldn't wake up. Then the really bad shocking news. My mother signed a DNR, or do not resuscitate, which means she had legal papers saying that they had to remove the tube and let her go. My mother didn't tell anyone. It wasn't until they got her to the hospital and pulled her records they knew. I am over 800 miles away, and this doctor is saying he has to let my mother die. I am sobbing at this point, begging him to keep it long enough for me to get home to see her. He refused, saying it was her wish to go. I had no choice but to agree. So I went to bed thinking my mother died that night. I called the hospital the next day expecting the news, but my mother was still alive. My hopes soared. My mom is a fighter. The nurse tells me she still isn't conscious. I told her to tell my mom, hang on, I'm coming. I made the 12-hour plus drive home to get to the hospital to see my mother. I got there at 1 a.m. on October 31st. Halloween, my favorite holiday. The third time my world shifted on its axis was sitting in the hospital parking lot preparing to go see my mother. Walking into the hospital was surreal, like I was watching some other daughter walk down the hall to her mother's ICU room. One thing about ICU is how quiet they can be. I stopped at the nurse's desk, told them who I was and who I was there to see. The nurse gave me a sympathetic look and took me to her room. The second I stepped foot in her doorway, I knew my mother was gone. A husk of her lay in that hospital bed, truly one of the most horrific things I have ever seen. Her body struggled to live, these horrible gasping respirations. She was gone, but her body was still here. Meds kept her blood pressure up enough to sustain life. I wanted to rip it all off of her. This wasn't right. I knew my brother needed to be there to say goodbye, so I sat by my mother's bedside alone for 9 hours watching her gasp for air. Her body had shut down, except her heart, lungs, and a tiny portion of brain. It was the worst thing I ever had to do, but I talked to her, told her about my babies and how excited they were to trick or treat. My brother and asshole got to the hospital around 9:30. My mom's oncologist met me before they got there and dropped the bombshell. The cancer my mom had was ovarian, with mets everywhere, and she recommended I get tested for the gene that increases risks. I just kind of nodded in shock. I signed the papers to take my mom off all medical support shortly after she left. Once my brother and asshole got there, the nurse took all the machines and lines off, and I held her hands as they gave her meds to make her comfortable. My mother died October 31st at 10:07 in the morning. My whole world fell off its axis. I was now the caretaker of my family, and I had to figure out how to be her. I got things as situated as I could in the 3 days I could stay, arranged her cremation as she wanted, and ended up paying for it because the asshole left her life insurance lapse. I grieved the loss of my mother heavily and had to scramble to take care of my brother, an asshole. To say I was stressed and busy was an understatement. I put the oncologist warning out in my head. Until almost 2 years later when I had pain in my abdomen. Then suddenly her warning popped in my head. I had blood work done and found out I do carry that gene that increases my cancer risk. Right as my own doctor finds a mass on my ovary. Cue world shift again. My doctor immediately orders more scans and schedules me for surgery rather than do a biopsy and wait. I'm on board with this idea, so I went in for surgery December of last year. My doctor found a suspicious mass on my left ovary. He removed both ovaries, both tubes, and mass. The biopsy on the mass actually came back benign, but on my other ovary, the one with no visible mass, they found stage 1 cancer. I had ovarian cancer and had no idea. By doing the surgery, the surgeon actually caught it early. If my mother had not died of ovarian cancer and her doctor told me to get genetically tested, I would not have known I had it until it was too late. Ovarian cancer spreads quickly, and usually by the time it's found, like my mother, it's too late. My blood test result pushed my doctor to do more than biopsy, and removing both ovaries, he caught the real threat. My mother's death saved my life, along with the BRCA gene test. I cannot stress enough that everyone should get that test to find out your cancer risks. Knowledge is power, especially in healthcare. I have sent my mother's oncologist flowers every year on her birthday and Halloween.
My biggest secret I have to tell you. Hi. All you need to know about me is that I'm currently almost 14 and a female. One day I was with my older sister at a festival, and we went to a psychic palm reader. And my sister went first, and according to hers, it went very well, and she had a great reading. Now when I went in, the lady touched my hands and jolted back. I was scared, but she seemed terrified of what she had just noticed. She started chanting out the number 14 over and over, and then she started trying to get some words out of it. I was scared and trying to help her. She said, and I quote, "Dark, something dark, window 14, him 14, no, dark, ZMSJ, beach, name." I was shaking her to make her come out of it, and when she did, she sprung straight into action, writing down her phone number and address of her shop, and told me to come there before my 14th birthday, so she could help. For a while, I just thought she was insane, and it was a scam. Then I decided to call her, and the phone line said that it was disconnected. So I looked up her shop, and it is not a thing. It's like she completely disappeared off the face of the earth. That's when I looked back at what she said, and I remembered she said window, and immediately I thought of one thing. When I was about 11 years old, I had a thing happen to my window when I was in my room that I remember my dad telling me to shut my window and lock it because it started to get cold outside, and I did as he said. But later that night, I woke up to being really cold. I looked over in my window, and it has been unlocked and lifted just slightly, but nothing else happened that night. I shut the window, locked it, and I woke up in the morning. It was still locked. And then, my 12th birthday, the same thing happened, but the window was just a little bit more open. That happened twice that night, before I woke up in the next morning. But then, my 13th birthday happened. I had remembered that my window opens on my birthday sometimes, which I thought was just some weird coincidence. So that night, I had a couple of friends over, and we and my parents all watched a movie outside the living room. But in the middle of watching a movie, we heard a loud crack come from my room. Immediately my dad ran into there to see what happened, and he just walked in and said, "What the heck?" I followed him in there. When I looked at the window, I was a little scared to see that there had been a large crack in the middle of the top part of my window. And the window was completely open, and the screen was popped out, and it had fallen onto the ground outside. We checked everywhere that night, inside the house and outside. There was no sign of forced entry. No one had been there. The window just cracked open, and the screen had popped out. And now, to hear that the palm reader said something about my being aware of being 14, I was so scared. I mean, how could she have known that? The scary part was the fact that she was scared of me. But just this experience isn't why I decided to write this. It was because I went to the fair a few days ago, and I went to a tarot card reader with my older sister again, and she heard everything my tarot card reader said. That I would be going somewhere soon. I didn't know, but it wasn't really my decision, and that something very dark would happen to me. And she said that it would happen very soon. My birthday is also very soon. I was immediately scared of what that could have meant, but she also said that I would meet someone, a boy. He would make my life better. He would take me somewhere that I would feel free. But she did say that I would never fall in love with him until I really saw who he was. She said that he would be a cocky and full of himself and mean and just overall not a good person. But then I would see the real him and fall in love even though no one would even know about it. Which didn't make any sense to me. The night after I got back, in this dream I was running through the woods, and I was happy. I was running through the woods completely happy, and someone was there running with me. Even though I couldn't see them, I didn't see who it was. And after I had run for a while, I saw a beach that I recognized. I don't know where from, and I ran to the beach, and sat next to me was a rock, and engraved on that rock was the name Zita, which for some reason I knew was the first name in the initials of ZMSJ, which were the initials of the thing the palm reader had said. Then that's when I woke up. I had a dream the next night where I could tell that I was younger. And I was in a small beach house on a small deserted island, not much bigger than the house itself. And I walked up to a mirror and looked at myself. I looked just like me, but with no memory of even being me. I'll admit, I looked a little more muscular and a little more roughed up. But then I got angry at something for some reason. And when I looked back at myself, my soft green eyes turned ice blue for just a second, and then I woke up. But after that dream, I'm scared to sleep tonight, and also my birthday is coming up in less than a month, and I don't know what to expect. So there you go. My story, if literally anyone has read this far. I just needed to put it out there, somewhere, because I'm scared. Spirit, universal signs, or final destination. It's 9/11/2018 at 10:30 a.m., and I'm having the most weird day of my life. But this weirdness isn't just affecting me. My boyfriend is also having an off, weird, and unsettling day as well. We woke up between 5:30 to 6 a.m., not on purpose. But this isn't an odd occurrence for us to wake up early. I have a kidney disease, so when the pain is high, I cannot sleep. He usually stays up with me until I feel better. Nothing weird started happening until around 7 or 8 a.m. He goes off in a trance, and I knew he had seen something that had freaked him out. I asked him what he had seen, and he replied, "Thought I seen a white light go from the kitchen door to the bathroom door, but my eyes were probably playing tricks on me." I had replied to that with a simple, "You're tired. Go get some sleep." But once he's awake for good. Some time goes by and I see a white, round, and bright light that resembles an orb fly from the kitchen to the bathroom. I got freaked out and expressed to him what I had seen. We sat for a little bit being spooked. We decided to play with an Ouija board. Wonderful idea, I know. Nothing happened. It didn't work. Or did it? We started hearing knocks and threes in our kitchen. Went to investigate. Nothing. Appeared normal. It happened 3 times. Hasn't happened since. This was 8:38 a.m. After this happened, my boyfriend randomly says, "Oh, today is 9/11," and we go on discussing that topic a little bit. Then we decided to Google signs of ghosts in house. Another wonderful idea. And the signs seemed true. For us, at the moment. Knocks, orbs, etc. Then I stumbled across pages like, "Signs a spirit is trying to communicate with you. When will you die? And how will you die? Quiz." I clicked every page, and, well, here's my discoveries. Spirit communication. Sending certain numbers or words. Radio stations. Light bulbs going out frequently, which doesn't happen all the time at our house. Death date. Took the quiz. Got a long time before I die. Year 2069. The boyfriend got 2092. No, we do not believe in this. Did it merely for shits and giggles. How will I die? I got car accident and he got in his sleep from old age. Again, do not believe in this, but it does have significance to my story. Nothing else happens weird. I'm still feeling sick and pain, but it's time for him to work. I drive him to work because he can't drive at the moment. This is where our day gets weirder. Like, guys, I'm talking the feeling of Final Destination. We keep hitting all red lights. Nothing unusual though, except he goes to turn on the radio. "Roxanne, you don't have to put on the red light." Funny coincidence? We laughed it off and continued our car ride. I take the exit to the interstate and he flips radio stations. Interstate driving. Okay, not funny anymore. We started getting spooked. Talk about the spirit communicating through radio stations. We get on the interstate and this van pulls out in front of me with a huge red or white sign that read September 11th, 2001. Remember how I was discussing 9/11, today's date? Strange, I tell him. I'm having anxiety. I slow down, drive with more caution than usual. He flips radio stations. "I'm feeling anxious." And we both get even more spooked. Turn off the radio. Drove past this loud sound, construction zone, and it freaked me out. Felt more louder than usual. And I literally felt like I was in Final Destination. Rolled up my windows and we discussed being spooked. Reached his work. Nothing else happened. He's there currently. I don't work until 6:45 p.m., so I'm currently home while writing this. I feel I'm being watched. I have heard the creaking of the floor where you have to stand to make it creak, and I have the feeling of something bad is going to happen. I'll keep updated in comments, but I wanted this day documented. I also want to know if anyone has this type of stuff going on to them, especially the radio stations. I'm a big believer in universal signs, but now I'm debating whether a spirit is trying to contact me. What do you think? Creepy grocery guy. Little backstory, I was 16 when this happened, and I was in excellent physical shape. I'm now 17. The diner I worked at was on the side of a road and was next to a gas station that we shared car parks with. The diner had an odd setup to get to the back bins and the storeroom. You had to go through a big metal door, and that was at the back of the kitchen. The diner I worked at also had a fresh produce supplier that delivered most days early in the morning, and they had a new delivery boy. I'll call him Billy. He had been with them for around 2 months. He was a hot topic between the female employees, as he was extremely good looking, but seemed to be a loner. I don't know for sure, but I think he was around 18 or 19. I'd spoken to him before, and he had asked me for my number once, but I politely said I don't give it out. I was 3 months into my first paying job at a local diner working as a waitress when this happened, and on this particular day, I was asked to stay on and work the night shift with a female colleague that I was familiar with. I didn't mind, as I saw it as an opportunity for extra cash. It was around 12:30 a.m. when the last family eating left. So it was up to me, the other female waitress aged 18, and the male chef, who I believe was around the age of 24, to clean and lock the place up, as the owners were on vacation. I decided to take the trash to the bins out back, as I was too tired to do anything else like sweep up or clean the tables. To this day, I regret being lazy. To get back to the bins, you have to go through the kitchen, and then through a big heavy metal door, which I was okay about doing as I've done it many times before. But once I got out, I forgot that the hinge where the door clips to the wall was broken, and it slipped and closed naturally. I was angry as I'd have to walk around the whole diner to get back in through the front door. As I stretched up to throw the bag in the bin, I heard a noise. It sounded like a grunt, and it kind of spooked me. But I put it down to my imagination. But then I heard it again, and it was coming from the storeroom. Me, being my stupid Dora the Explorer-ass self, poked my head into the storeroom, and at the beginning I saw nothing. But out of the corner of my eye, I caught something moving very slowly toward me, and as my eyes adjusted, it was Billy, the grocery boy. And he was holding his trainers in one hand. Once he saw I noticed him, he froze. I was trying to think through every logical explanation for why he would be in the storeroom at this time. But I got interrupted by Billy stuttering, I'm just putting your delivery in here. My van broke down. That's why I'm so late. This frightened me to the core, as my boss told me she had not made any orders, as we needed to use up old stock first. And then it clicked. He had no shoes on. He was trying to sneak up on me. We just stared at each other, and I muttered, "Oh, that's okay. I'm going inside now. Shut the door when you're done." As I felt if I questioned why he was there, he would get hostile, and the situation for me would become even worse. I proceeded to back away, still facing him, until I was near the gate that opened into the car park. "The kitchen door's shut, silly." He laughed slightly. I've never felt so patronized in my life. He was talking to me as if I was a child that he was correcting. "Oh yeah, ha ha ha. Looks like I'll have to go the long way." I joked about it as I could feel my situation getting worse. He just had an expression that reminded me of that cat from Alice in Wonderland. Yeah, just shut the door when you're done. Bye." I shout out before turning around and opening the gate. My whole body froze when I felt a vice grip on my wrist. Now that I think of it, I'm surprised he didn't break it. By instinct, I started tugging my arm away and shouted at him something like, "Dude, what the fuck? Get off me." But that only seemed to make it worse, and it was almost like he loved to see me struggle. "Stop resisting me," he said in a flat tone as he used his other hand to try and pull my skirt down. I think all my fear turned into fight as I began kicking and punching the right side of his face. I'm about 5'8", and he is probably around 6'2". I think I poked him in the eye with one of the fake nails I had on, and he instantly let go and started cussing very loud. I took my chance and bolted out of the gate and into the car park, which was empty, a part of one car parked in the gas station at a pump. I looked closer. Inside was occupied before I ran toward it. I looked back at the gate and saw Billy running straight at me, calling and shouting things like, "I knew you were a bad girl," and "Get back here, you stupid slut." The loud shouting seemed to get attention of the car. And to my surprise, it was the family that had left 10 minutes before. Once I reached the car, they were all standing outside and looked confused until they saw Billy running towards us. The father and the son stood in front of me and told him to calm down or they'll call the cops. This just seemed to make Billy worse. He started hissing at them and jumped at me before he could grab me. The father grabbed him and pushed him so hard and he fell to the ground. We all just stared at him while he got up off the floor and dusted himself off. "You really should have given me your number." He just nodded his head at me like he was scolding a child. All the fear I was keeping in just came out and I began sobbing hysterically into the mother's chest. The older brother started to cuss Billy out and push him away from all of us. "I like the way you fight me." He smirked at me and turned around and started walking towards the road, the brother following him to make sure he left. When the cops arrived, we went into the diner and I gave a full statement and so did the family. It turns out the other waitress and the chef were cleaning with the radio on with full volume, so they couldn't hear me screaming. When my boss came back, she was told everything by the police, and we now have a new supplier. The kitchen door hinge is now fixed, and I no longer take the trash out at night. As we knew all of Billy's employers, the police paid them a visit, only to be told he quit 2 weeks prior, and the address he had given them was a block of abandoned apartments, and his number was disconnected, so nothing ever came of the police report. I am now dating the oldest brother of the Diner family. I am so thankful that they couldn't work their sat-nav, because I know I couldn't have outrun Billy to the entrance of the diner.
Hello from Elena. I am 20 years old, and I'm from Italy, Lombardy to be precise. I was born on the 3rd day in the month of April. I'm the second child in a family of 4 children that consists of 3 males and 1 female, and yes, I'm the only female, surrounded with brothers that had my back each time I was in trouble. Although I stayed with my grandmother, they had their ways of being around me. I was told I lost my parents at an early age. My brothers went to stay with a family friend where they were really maltreated. But they had no choice than to stay with them because they had nowhere else to go. Even though they would come visiting, I and my grandmother once in a while, they tried not to make us feel sad for the maltreatment they were going through, so they keep happy faces each time. I can't remember the early stages of my infant life, as I have never heard nor asked about it from my parents because I never had the chance to. I went to stay with my grandmother immediately after they died, and I also don't have any proof of it because there is no piece of proof left to be proud of as a history of my infancy life. I have passion for writing. I was 12 when I started writing because I always wanted to be a great writer, like Victor Hugo, who wrote Les Miserables, or like Roman Roland, who wrote John Christopher. They have influenced millions of people through their books. I also wanted to be a great psychologist, like William James or Sigmund Freud, who could read people's mind. Of course, I am nowhere close to these people yet, but I aspire and aim to be like them someday. Back then in my teens, it was mostly silly rhymes and poems of random stories and thoughts, and sadly, a lot about my struggles with my brothers and myself that I wrote about, because the words kept coming and I kept writing. How glad I am that my teens are long gone. I was so depressed. Most times, I had to do some side jobs so myself and my grandmother could survive. We hardly eat 3 square meals, but we survived each passing day. I am a person who is very positive about every aspect of life. There are many things I like to do, to see, and to experience. I like to read, I like to write, I like to think, I like to talk, I like to listen. I like to see the sunrise in the morning. I like to look at the clouds in the sky with a blank mind. I like to do thought experiment when I cannot sleep in the middle of the night. I like flowers in the spring, rain in the summer, and snow in the winter. Sometimes grandmother will look at me and say, "You are going to be so great in life, and I can't wait to see you achieve your dreams." Those words gave me strength to keep fighting. So since childhood, I grew up with this best at everything attitude in me. I used to be the best scholar in class, active participant in every sphere. And when I was appreciated for this, confidence used to flow through me no matter what. However, as the teenage years hit me, I started to face mental bullying. Slowly, it started affecting me negatively, and as much as I resisted it, I was drawn more into it. Within a few years, my whole focus was shifted to fight this. I lost focus of my academics and my other skills, and the results started reflecting in my life. I was losing what I had. Even my grandmother noticed it. She wasn't happy about it, but she still encouraged me to not give up. She wasn't the type that will force you out of your own will or force you to talk when something goes wrong. She just gives you reason not to give up. But when my school grade results came out, I was suddenly into the reality of myself. The pride I used to see in everyone's eyes, my image of a confident girl, it was all gone, and it was hard for me to accept. Day by day, as the law says, I attracted it more. There was a time when I had lost all the belief in myself, and lost myself completely. I thought of suicide, but on a second thought, I had to make my brothers and grandmother proud. Continuous failures kept coming, and screwed up friendships made it even worse. I had lost where to go in life, what to do with my career, and to whom I should seek for help. I knew if I had gone to my grandmother, she would just console me with her words of encouragement, and I was not ready to listen to the same words. Although those words have helped me, but it wasn't what I needed. In the process of me seeking for help, I met one of my teachers in school who called me to his office because he noticed my grades had gone down, and I had not been the way I used to be in class. He sat me down and asked me so many questions. Some of them I can't even remember. He gave me examples of people that were like me, and they ended up wasting their lives because they kept to themselves. His words pierced into my heart. I was stirred up to do better, not to allow myself to be mediocre. Just almost immediately after, I got my strength back. Then, the coronavirus came. I'm sure you have heard about stories where most people are infected with coronavirus. And as we all know, the coronavirus is a deadly disease, and it's the #1 talk of the town in all social media now. A lot of people have been infected with it currently, and I wasn't lucky. As many of us so, I got infected from who knows where or what, actually. It's shocking, right? Yes, I know. Even I haven't come to terms with it. Of all the people who had to be infected, it had to be me. Of all the hardship and circumstances I had been through, I still got an addition to it. Here I was searching for help so I can get back to the right track of my life. And when I finally found help, coronavirus came to damage it. It was on a sunny day. I noticed I've been coughing heavily, sneezing non-stop. I was scared I had tuberculosis because it was so intense. I still had a little cash with me from the last side job I went to do, so I went to the pharmacy to get drugs to stop the cough, but it kept on going for a week. Immediately, my grandmother noticed this symptom in me. She picked me up and we drove straight to the hospital, and I tested to be coronavirus positive. My grandmother has been coughing for like 2 days now. Before we went to the hospital, but it wasn't intense, so I paid no attention to it. But unfortunately, the doctor also told my grandmother to diagnose herself, so she had to be sure if she had this disease or not. I was so scared because she had been coughing too, and I paid no attention to it. But unfortunately, my grandmother was also diagnosed of this same disease called coronavirus. I felt so bad. I had promised to give her a better life, but all I did was infect her with a disease that I'm not sure we will survive from. Immediately, we were admitted into the hospital so as not to spread the virus. We were both placed on the same treatment and medication. We were both in the same hospital room, and all my grandmother could do was to shed tears because she never expected myself and her to be a victim of this virus. I remembered when I was little, when she made sure I had food to eat, when she would encourage me with her consistent words. I felt like a failure. I was very unhappy. I was supposed to make her proud, but now, how I have failed. After 2 days in the hospital, a lot of patients were brought in and they'd been diagnosed of this same virus. The hospital was so full to the extent that there was no bed to accommodate a lot of people that were diagnosed of this virus. As the result of this, a nurse came in and told me she would be moving me away from the bed to the corridor, reason being that the new patient needs to be admitted immediately. I was pleading with her not to move me away from the bed, but during our conversation, my grandmother overheard us, and she told the nurse not to move me away from the bed. Instead, she will prefer if the nurse can move her instead of me. My grandmother loves me so much that she never prays that anything should happen to me. The nurse then took my grandmother away from the bed, and she was placed in the corridor. It was so painful, me looking at her lying down on the floor helpless. But there was nothing I could do to help the situation. After my grandmother was dropped at the corridor, not up to 2 days, she died. My grandmother died, and no one cares about her. I wanted to go with her. I felt guilty for infecting her with the virus. Why didn't it take me away instead of her? I wish I had magical powers to bring her back to life, but she was gone. Grandma was gone, never to return. She left me alone in this world. After the death of my grandmother, I still stayed some month in the hospital, lifeless and helpless. It was so difficult to survive. My brothers were scared to visit me because they didn't want to be infected. The doctors had advised them not to come close, else they might get infected as well. Even though they were in charge of the bills, they still didn't come close. At first, I was angry, but then I didn't want their case to be like that of Grandma, so I understood them. They were the only family I had left. On a faithful Monday morning, the clouds were still warm. The wind was blowing slowly, and my eyes were gazed at the sky beside the window, close to my sickbed. I was still in shock and sadness of Grandma's death, lost in thoughts. I heard the voice of the nurse assigned to me that morning. "The doctor is coming soon to check you." As she left, all I could think of was why the doctor wanted to check me. There's no hope left. I was going to die anyway. As he came in with a bright smile, he greeted me and told me I was responding to treatment because the virus had reduced in my system. I was so shocked. How that could be possible, I asked him. All he did was smile and left. In less than 2 weeks, I was diagnosed as being free of coronavirus. Shocking, right? I know. but I can't explain it either. I guess it's what you called a miracle. But I knew luck found me and was giving me a chance to fulfill my dreams. I have just been released from the hospital as a survived person of coronavirus. Just don't know what to do with my life. It's so desperate right now. I was scared to go to my brother's place to meet them, but then I had nowhere else to go. So I went to meet them. On getting there, I met just two of them. They were surprised to see me, but not happy. They told me of how my third brother also got infected of this same coronavirus and died. I was literally on the floor crying and screaming, "Why me?" I lost another family again. I couldn't bear it. They were able to console me, but they didn't want me to stay with them because they didn't want me to be maltreated as they were. I was hopeless once again. I didn't know what to do or where else to go to. Will I end up sleeping on the streets of Lombardy? I feel so lonely, and life hasn't been fair to me. Where have I gone wrong? What do I do now? Please comment on this video and help me.
Do you sometimes wish you could forget some days? Skip them or just play rewind on the awful clips of your life? The pain and the stress sometimes make you unfocused. Your vision goes blurred and mind all hazy. Well, it was exactly one of those days. But first, I'll give you a little background about me. I'm Natalie. I am 14 years old. I have recently started going out with a boy from my school, Harry. He's a dream come true. He has asked me to be his girlfriend a few weeks ago. My mom passed away when I was 6, and I was brought up by my dad, who is extremely hard-working. My dad is a mechanic and leaves home at the crack of dawn. It was a Thursday morning. My dad had already left for work. I was in deep slumber when a shooting pain in my stomach jolted through my entire body. It was hard for me to breathe. It took everything in my body to get up from my bed. My dog was watching me with the bleary eyes, and I wondered, why can't he do something? Can he see my agony? After the struggle, I finally grabbed hold of my phone and called 911. The dispatcher was kind and understanding. She was quick to send me help. Finally, they arrived. The sound of the ambulance alerted my dog. My dog bolted towards the door and started barking continuously. As a result, they broke the main door and took me to the hospital. I opened my eyes to a scrupulously spotless hospital room. Beams of sunlight filtered through the window. "Relax, honey," I heard a soft voice whisper. It was a nurse. I sighed and tried to relax. Within the fraction of a few seconds, I glanced at my stomach, which made me panic. It was swollen to the size of a hot air balloon. I started questioning myself. "What is this?" I asked myself repeatedly. It took me a fine moment before it dawned upon me. I let out a huge gasp. Am I a 14-year-old growing a real-life baby in my tummy? Am I going to become a mother? I cringed at the thought, but the sight of my growing stomach only confirmed my realization. "But I've only had my first kiss with Harry a few days ago," I said as I tried to gather my thoughts. "This can't be true." I started crying relentlessly. My shrieks and cries grasped the attention of the nurses. They looked at me and started laughing. Their laughter overshadowed my agony. Their shrill laugh made my head spin, which came to a halt when I heard a sudden knock at the door. A feeling of relief washed over me as the person behind the door was my affectionate father. "Dad, I've missed you," I breathed. My dad had a shabby appearance. His eyes were sunken in with huge eye bags underneath. I was slightly confused. He rushed towards me and engulfed me in a hug. He ignored my growing belly, but when he saw, he gave me a smile. "I can't believe I'm going to be a grandfather." I was taken back. Why is he behaving like that? I pondered. That was certainly not the reaction I was expecting. "We have to get you out of this hell," said my dad. "Why?" I questioned. "They are not good for you." It would be an understatement if I say I was bewildered at how my dad was behaving. The nurses started laughing out of the blue. Laughter echoed through the white walls of the hospital room. It made my dad lose his temper. He started yelling at them. Suddenly, made his way towards me and picked me. He detached the tube of the drip out of my arm. I gasped due to the sudden discomfort. His actions alerted the hospital staff. The nurses called the security and they took my dad away. They prevented him from seeing me afterward. In the next few minutes, the same intensity of pain ran through my frail body. The nurses injected medicine into my body and asked me to relax. "You'll be all right, darling," comforted a nurse. I threw up multiple times that night, which consequently made me feel better. They gave me a few pills to make me fall asleep. Later that night, I woke up due to a disturbance in my room. I was shocked to see my dad in my room. He had his hand over my attendant's mouth. I was petrified. I had never seen that mysterious terror in my dad's eyes. He was unrecognizable in nurse scrubs. Anyone could be easily fooled by his new persona. I didn't know what to do. But I knew one thing. My life was in danger. He hurriedly put me in the wheelchair, ripping away the drips. "Dad, stop! Dad, you are hurting me!" I let out a faint, incoherent cry. "Shut up!" Dad yelled. His eyes were bloodshot red, skin pale and lips trembling. I closed my eyes momentarily and a whimper escaped my mouth. What has come over my dad? I wished my mom was still alive. Is it too much to ask for? I thought medicine and illness made me emotional. I hated that feeling. My dad took a hold of my wheelchair and rushed through the bleak hospital hallway. He greeted the doctors and hospital staff in a sing-song female voice. I never knew my dad had astounding acting skills, but similarly, I didn't know anything about him, did I? I questioned myself. I never knew I had to see the day I'd have to see his facade slipping away. But here I was, being escorted by my dad dressed in nurse clothes. Life is so strange. It was too much to process for my 14-year-old brain. A doctor stopped us at one point and requested my dad to join him for his daily round at the children's ward. My dad pushed my wheelchair in a vacant hospital room and left me to help the doctors. I was surprised. He left me there for some time and came back with a devilish grin plastered on his face. They are such fools, the doctors. I can outsmart them every single day. I couldn't believe my dad would say such things for people highly regarded in our society. He was being outrageously awful. He told me that he has checked the patient's body temperature, measured blood pressure, and blood glucose concentrations. That easy, you see. They think they're gods. I had been horrified for my life as well as the ones my dad treated a while ago. Few seconds passed, and I heard some voices. "Catch them! Catch them! They are running! Phone the security now!" The entire hospital was in mayhem. People were running. Nurses, visitors, doctors, and admin staff, all of them were in a state of chaos. But nothing could stop my dad. He was still going peacefully at his own pace, oblivious to the chaos caused by his antics. A yell stopped him for a moment, but he grabbed the wheelchair and started sprinting through the hospital towards the elevator, colliding with the medical equipment and food trolleys in our way. At one point, he toppled cleaning trolley. There was alcohol and disinfectant all over the floor. God help me! Save me from the monster my dad has become! Nurses were calling the security, and I wondered why it took them so long. "Please don't harm me," I cried. My mind was spinning and my vision was becoming hazy, but I tried my best to keep myself conscious. I took small breaths as instructed by my father once. I wanted my father back. "Where did you go, Dad? Please, what has happened to you?" He blatantly ignored my cries. Finally, we reached the elevator. My heart was pounding hard against my chest. I had streams of tears running down my cheeks. My life was at risk because of my father. Is there anyone more unlucky than me? I questioned myself. I hope not. My dad pushed the buttons to the highest floor. "We'll put you to sleep forever. These doctors are no good for your deteriorating health," he whispered in my ear. For the first time in my life, hearing my dad's voice caused shivers to run through my body. I always found his voice soothing and comforting. I was certain he was possessed or something. He was behaving like a hysterical madman. Not only that, but he also didn't care about his blood, me. We reached the 40th floor. I was frightened. The doors of the elevator opened. Luckily, the security guards reached before us. His face lost its color, his eyes were wide, and his body shaking. He was panic-stricken. In a matter of seconds, he pushed me towards the security guys. I was grateful they arrived on time. I didn't even want to think about what could have happened if they didn't come to rescue me. My dad went hysterical. He was mocking them. He was making animal-like noises. "Catch me if you can." He looked like a kid has taken away his favorite stuffed toy or candy. "Let's have kids." "Kids?" I questioned. He sure had some mental issues. What could have happened in a span of night? I didn't know. He ran towards the stairs with guards following behind him. I was left all alone on God knows what floor. I screamed and cried for help. I tried to gather strength to get up on my legs. My legs were shaking. I was having hot flashes and I was sweating profusely. I said my prayers repeatedly. God, give me the strength to stand up. Put me to my feet. It took everything in me to get up. I gripped the sides of the wheelchair tightly, trying to stand up. Finally, I got up. I couldn't believe myself. I let out a scream. I yelled, "Hurrah! I can walk!" With that, I went inside the elevator. Despite Dad's questionable antics, I still loved him. Why wouldn't I? He had brought me up with all the love and affection in this world. I was the luckiest kid with the most affectionate and caring father and an adorable little pup. Oh, my pup, you must be hungry. The thought of my puppy all alone in my house saddened me. I stopped at each floor to help my dad, but couldn't see him anywhere. I screamed his name each time, but my efforts proved to be useless. At the 7th floor, I finally saw him. But what I saw made my head spin. I couldn't believe I saw that with my own eyes. My jaw went slack. I thought I was daydreaming, so I pinched myself again and again. It was my dad getting into a fight with someone who was also my dad. I was shocked. My dad was wearing his work clothes. They were greasy. Couldn't contain my emotions and thoughts. It was the moment I passed out. When I woke up and saw my loving dad next to me, feeling of relief washed over me. My dad gave me a warm embrace. I couldn't stop crying. I was so scared. Do you know what has happened? Please, Dad, I need to know. He told me to relax. He told me that guy was a criminal who had run away from jail. He was taking revenge on the hospital. The hospital had sent him to jail because he took part in criminal activities taken place at the hospital a few years ago. He resembled my dad, which is why I mistook him as my dad. In addition to this, I ate too much Chipotle, which caused food poisoning. I needed emergency treatment, which I received promptly. My dad brought me my favorite tomato cream soup and kissed my forehead. "You're safe, my kid."
Hopeless. The alarm rang. 6:30 a.m. He turned it off and looked up at the ceiling. Am I living or surviving, he thought. After all, working 12 hours a day and going to college on the remaining time is not much of a life. I managed to get up after some time. He checked the time on his phone. 6:53. He's going to be late again. His boss will complain about him. This is a bad day after all, maybe the worst of the year, he talks to himself as he gets ready to leave without any emotion. He manages to get out of the house eventually. His house is 4 minutes from the bus stop. Time is around 7:20. He's not running because the bus goes around 7:28 at that stop. Just when I'm getting to the street, the bus goes by. It's too far to make it running. It's hopeless anyway. He's starting to think he's going to get busted. He's starting to think about it. He starts thinking about why he does this, why he cares. He works at a crappy job that barely pays the bills anyway. His boss is the devil in person. The company buys the workers for $3 an hour and sells them for $15 an hour. He knows it. His position has access to such reports. Every time he remembers that the boss's son is his coworker and he receives better wages than him and doesn't do anything, he gets even more demotivated. He looks at his hand. He looks at his hands and thinks, I'm only here for her. If not for her, I would have left this planet already. He looks around. The bus stop got crowded without him noticing. He looks to the left, and the bus is coming. 7:44. His shift starts at 8 o'clock and he's only taking the first bus. There's 2 more to go after this one. The bus stops, he gets in. Bus is crowded. The rest of the people get in too. The bus feels like a tuna can. He observes the surroundings. There are people talking and laughing, people on the phone texting. Everyone seems so happy. Even the bus is at least 1 double maximum capacity. He sneaks his hand into his backpack. It's a hard task since he can barely move his arms. He grabs his headphones, plugs them in. Life gets 2% better. He does not hear the useless talking now. He's isolated. The bus arrives at the terminal. He rushes towards the next one. Just as before, another tuna can. It's midwinter. He left home with 2 coats. However, the amount of people produces extreme amounts of human heat. He's sweating already. He takes off the coats as he walks onto the bus. It's 8:03 already, and he's far from work. He's gotten to a point where he doesn't care anymore. Today is a bad day after all, just like yesterday. Time goes by. The bus leaves the terminal at 8:10. He is 10 minutes late already. The bus leaves only to stop a couple of meters ahead. Traffic. Intense traffic. It's peak hour. The city's grown insanely in population in the last 10 years. No roads were planned. Average speed is 20 kilometers an hour. His bus needs to cross the city to get to the other terminal. He feels like a gasoline doll. The bus starts and stops every 50 meters. His body waves left and right. This goes for about 30 minutes when he finally makes it to the other terminal. 8:40 now. He goes to where the last bus stops, looks at the board for the bus schedule. Last one left 8:35. Next one is 9:15 a.m. He's not mad, not sad. He does not feel anything at all. He feels empty, with 0 motivation and will. He sits and waits, watching people go by. There he is, an empty human being watching other empty human beings rushing towards their work just as he is. Maybe I shouldn't complain that much, is the thought that revolves around his mind. He just snaps out of his thoughts, gets a piece of paper and a pen, and then starts drawing the terminal structure. He starts with the pillars, big black metal bars, then proceeds to the ceiling, metal bars installed in some kind of web shape. There are iron bars everywhere. He draws the signs. His bus arrives. He checks the time and it's 9:13. He hops inside the bus and gets a seat. This is the only bus that does not feel like a pressure cooker. He gives a small smile and remembers that he is hungry. Maybe that's why he made so many analogies with food. The bus starts and leaves the terminal. He's almost to hell. How I meet again. So I don't really know how to title this. Let me just begin. Back when I was a kid, I lived in Jacksonville, Florida. I loved it there till I was in the 6th grade. I moved around a lot too. The neighbor which I'm talking about owned a 2-story house next to my family's 1-story house. We lived in that house for a total of 3 years and then moved to a new neighborhood. During these 3 years, me and my brother rarely went outside. Our parents didn't like the idea. Besides, studying to them was a higher priority than anything else, as they were first-generation immigrants and preferred us to get a good education. Anyway, here's where things get interesting. Our parents decided to go to Los Angeles, California. Fine by us. We didn't quite care where we lived, although it was difficult to say goodbye to all of those friends. After having lived 2 years in California, my mom decided to sign me and my brother up for an acting camp. There, I attended the 13 and under class, while my brother attended the 13 and older class. One of the days, we had an exercise where 2 people would tell a story, one made up and one real. Me and another guy convinced the teacher to let us both tell a true story. The story I chose coincidentally took place the few times I went outside in that neighborhood which I lived in for 3 years. In the story, I, for some reason, named both the city and state I lived in as well as the neighborhood. One of the girls who was in my class had around 10 people, asked me after the fact came out that both stories were true. Firstly, she asked where I lived in that neighborhood. I told her right before the speed bump. Then she asked if my family grew things in our backyard, to which I replied that was true too. And lastly, she asked if I had gone outside with my brother to play before, and I replied that was true as well. And as such, I managed to meet my neighbor who I never knew until now across the country in a small acting camp in a class of roughly 10 students. At first, I couldn't believe it myself. Maybe I'd forgotten the actual name of the neighborhood and simply agreed with her because it sounded familiar. But everything she described was accurate. Her house was indeed 2 stories and ours 1. We did indeed live with our grandparents. Me and my brother did indeed go outside sometimes. The addresses matched. The city and states matched. Of course, I was pretty dumbfounded with such a coincidence. What are the odds that two kids' parents decide to move across the country to, albeit a popular city, to roughly the same region in the city and sign their children up the same year to the same small acting camp? And what are the odds that I tell that story out of the many which I could have told? And the odds that I listed the city and state where I lived? Oh, and the girl pretty blatantly tried to flirt with me during that class. Didn't particularly like her, but she definitely had a crush on me. Quite touchy, if you know what I mean. This is just some extra info at this point. When we did some games, she liked clinging to me or talking with me every chance she got. I was actually turning 13 very soon during that camp, and as such was far more mature than the 10 or 11-year-olds in that class. I still remember one girl sitting in my lap against my protests because she wanted to win a game. Boy, did I feel flustered then. Well, it's always cool to reflect on the past. Get that type of immaturity going again. Just thinking about it makes me think about luck and how awkward I was back then. Sad story from my life. I come back to school after the Christmas holidays, and we have a new girl in our class. We don't talk much at first, since she seems pretty introverted. Soon, she joins my friend group, and we start talking a lot more. I discover she's a gamer girl, and we transition into talking a lot on Discord, too. We talk a lot, sometimes 4 to 6 hours on calls until 2 a.m. I get to know her. She seems really nice, and I get an illusion that I might have a chance of dating her. We carry on being friends for a month with a small, insignificant argument here and there, about things like not caring about each other or not being honest when we annoy each other. We get pretty close and become best friends. She tells me things about her never having a crush, which is understandable since she's young and gets on better with boys than girls. Anyway, we kind of start arguing more frequently for stupid reasons. I admit I was responsible for about half, but once we get that far, she wants to end the friendship, and I go along. We have a pretty deep discussion ending in us realizing we can't replace each other and realizing we have to let go. She asked things like, "Why do you care for me?" So far, we've only been arguing online and acting normal or avoiding each other in real life. Well, that was about to change. The next morning, she messages me with the idea of, let's not talk over messages and just talk in real life, since everything's okay in real life. I go along since I don't want to lose her as a friend, and that argument was generally stupid. So everything goes normal for the next couple of weeks. In 1 week, it gets serious. It was a normal day at school. I came back home and I felt that things were different. We didn't talk much now because of the arguments. I really didn't enjoy being with her, and I decided to write her some message describing how attached I was, how two-faced she acted, acting normal in real life, but then saying dumb stuff in arguments, how much I didn't want to argue, and that something had to change. Well, it turned out to be a 960-word message. Her response was pathetic. Furthermore, I found out she was annoyed by me expressing my emotions. For time's sake, I can summarize her response. Okay, don't suppress your emotions. I didn't expect this. I expected some kind of understanding. Once again, one morning, we get into some argument. She explains her lack of interest as a lack of human emotion when I tried to understand what is wrong with her, like what I did wrong. I didn't understand why we didn't understand each other. Things were about to escalate. Right now, I feel clueless and very confused, not knowing what the best thing to do is. I keep messaging her and trying to figure things out, to understand her at the very least. We get to a very dodgy area. She starts saying things like, "You think I would ask for someone to care about me? No, I want everyone to forget about me, so I can finally effing kill myself without hurting anyone." That was when things started to head south. I took it as some sort of joke at first. She joked about suicide a lot before, but now I was a bit concerned. Later, she sends the message of, "You want to see my arm? Oh no, you will think it's an attention-seeking thing." I go along. She sends a pic of her arm scratched to near bleeding. As I later found out, it's not the first year of her doing this. Just before, it wasn't as severe. I felt bad like anyone would. The same day after school, I message her that I feel bad. I know it wasn't because of me, but the least I could have done is be there for you and not annoy you with arguments. My feelings didn't matter at that point because she was my best friend for a while and I wanted to help. We message a bit. She's very hostile. I want to help. She doesn't take it. I ask why she says it's none of my business. It was my business. If it wasn't, I wouldn't feel bad. She says, just because I showed you a picture of my arm, you don't have to start pretending you feel bad for me. Introduce SB, suicide buddy, or her now best friend. SB is a 13 to 14-year-old male that attempted suicide last year in the previous grade and is now her best friend. She said things like, because if I died, you wouldn't care. I just need to get my family to stop caring. Then, SB, then I can be free. Is that enough escalation? No? It's about to get much worse. From the previous conversation, I realized she was really suicidal or was trying to fake it. It seemed fake to me at the time because she had no reason to do it. She had friends, she had family. Turns out she had to go to a therapist a couple of years ago for the same reason. I still don't know. Probably those scratches were from a year ago. She tells me she's a very morbid person and there's nothing wrong. I start realizing that I can't help her. I'm clueless about what to do, so me, being the idiot I am, keep messaging her. It's us discussing how she was a B to me, and she's agreeing, discussing how she's very fake, and her incapability to feel human emotions like remorse, happiness, and love. I realize she's been through many things and that I am helpless and nothing can change her past. The only thing that can be changed is her attitude. It's never late to start again. Trust people again, feel happy again. I explained this to her as a last-ditch attempt. Well, guess what? That only made her laugh, and it backfired on me. Backfired on me, you'd ask? Yes. We were discussing how I didn't know what led to this lifestyle when out of the blue she sends me an interesting image. An image of a girl ran over by a truck with all her vital organs just out in the open. I feel disgusted by just remembering it. She found it interesting from a biological point of view. Being very creeped out, I try to explain how she's not normal, how looking at those kinds of things isn't okay. I ask her, what if she was that girl? And this is what frightened me the most in her response. She said, what dies or experiences the pain? If I deserved the pain, I'd do it. The next couple of days was us arguing about her being sociopathic, feeding on people's emotions and having a lot in common with SB. SB is even more effed up than her. According to one of my friends, they watch strange types of hentai together. The next day, I come home to about 20 messages, reading something like, how do you want me to kill myself? I tell her I don't want her to die. I regret knowing her and that I hope she becomes normal, but without me being her best friend. This escalates to her sending more of those images, which I prefer not to describe. It's some not safe for life content. I don't know where she got them from, and I'm grateful she stopped sending them. Furthermore, it gets out of hand to the point where she begs me not to tell the school about it, because she doesn't want to go to a therapist again. 3 days later, last day of school before quarantine, we message under the table in class for a bit. I got some emotions out of her. I made her realize what kind of person she is, and she admitted. However, she is too weak to change and has adapted to this lifestyle. To conclude, what I'm left with is someone I wish I had never met in my friend group. Someone I had feelings for, but now every thought of her makes me feel disgusted. Thanks to the quarantine, I don't have to see her anytime soon. What do you guys think?
Hi, I'm Lisa. Life is indeed like an onion you peel one layer after the other, and sometimes it makes you cry. That's what happened to me when I was 13. My whole life came to a standstill when I was viciously knocked down by uncertainties of life. Imagine yourself not being able to move your body. You can hear and see everything happening around you, but you can't communicate. People come around you, but you can't talk to them. They can't even hug you. You try to give your body orders to blink, shake, laugh, and even cry, but it doesn't obey you. Imagine yourself not being able to say, I'm hungry, I'm pressed, I'm hurt, I'm cold. I lay lifeless for days, weeks, months, and years, disconnected from the physical world. You might be asking how this happened. Well, that was when I fell off the staircase. I and my twin brother Peter are the only children of my parents. We are of the middle class, and Dad makes sure we are comfortable with his meager paycheck. Dad said it took them 30 years before giving birth to us because Mom had no fallopian tubes. So all hope of Mom getting pregnant in life was lost, and they had to live with it. One day, 3 men visited them. They were hungry and haggard-looking. Then Mom asked them to come in, but they wouldn't. They sat outside. Mom went into the house, made them a nice meal, and they ate their fill. Then Dad asked them to come in the second time. They did, and left after a while. After 7 days, Mom became pregnant and finally gave birth to me and my twin brother, Peta. Dad said our birth changed a lot of things. It seems as if there was this separation between him and Mom. They no longer do things together as husband and wife. Mom no longer contributes to running of the family. All she cares about was her Peter, day in and day out. But Dad was not like her. He gave us equal love and support, irrespective of our differences. I so much love the only sibling I have in this world. But the love was not returned. All I kept getting from him was a stab, rejection, and gossiping me to Mom. We are not identical twins. We had a lot of character differences likewise in our lifestyle. I love nature and adventure, but my twin does not care for such. He can stay in front of the television all day. Peter is a sadist, but I'm not. Maybe that's why Dad loved being around me, while Mom preferred Peter. Maybe because he looked so much like her. Mom is one of the horrible persons I've ever met in my life. You neither know when she is happy or unhappy. She is always moody. The only thing that makes her happy is whenever she sees Peter. To my mom, I did not exist. But there were things that makes me happy. The presence of my dad in my life was the major thing. I love adventures, and so Dad decided to build an adventure room for me and Peter in the underground of our little home. But Peter was not interested. Even when I was cleaning the room, Peter walked in and laughed mockingly. That was ridiculous. I assisted Dad to decorate the room with different kinds of paintings and a lot of scientific pictures. So the adventure room became another room for me. Another thing that made me happy was the surprise gift Dad got for me on my 13th birthday. That's Rosie, my cat. She is not just a cat, but a companion, a friend, and maybe another twin. I was so happy, I couldn't thank Dad enough. From that day on, I had a companion in Dad's absence. Rosie seems to understand me more than anyone else in the house, including Dad. Whenever Mom and Peter puts on a horror movie and starts making all sorts of noise in the sitting room, I go to the adventure room with Rosie. I can hear him talk to me with his mews, as if he is saying, "Don't worry, I am here. Everything will be all right." On one of such days, I couldn't control myself and I yelled at my twin brother, "Why can't you stop all these noises?" I decided to go to my adventure room. I left with Rosie following me behind the staircase. But I never knew Peter was also running after me. Then Rosie came in front of me, winking her eyes left and right, as if she was telling me something. But I couldn't give her attention because I was walking very fast in anger. Perhaps she was trying to tell me that Peter was behind me. Suddenly, I felt a push and slipped off the staircase. Everywhere became dark. I could see Rosie running around me, not knowing what to do, but I couldn't talk to her. My mom and Peter locked up themselves in their room, abandoned me on the floor. But Rosie lay beside me crying until Dad came home around 11 p.m. He immediately rushed me to the hospital. After a little while, I felt awake. I tried to make a move, but there was no response. Then it dawned on me that I am no longer myself. Oh, how did this happen to me? Am I dead or what? I could feel my body shivering. Suddenly I heard someone. Wow, if I was able to hear someone, that means I wasn't dead after all. Yes, I heard him, but I couldn't see him. The way he talked made me understand that he's a doctor. He was explaining something to my parents. He told them that I had excess internal bleeding, which was as a result of delay of rushing me to the hospital immediately the accident happened. He said that I will be in this state until God knows when. Oh, I tried to open my eyes, to tell them that I can hear them, but my eyes couldn't move, neither could my mouth. I was devastated that I couldn't do anything. I automatically became a vegetable. How wicked life could be. Just 13 years ago, I had been a free girl who loves her dad, her cat, her career, and as well loves to play. I was happy and lively, but now everything suddenly changed. Doctors were confused. They thought I was completely in a coma. All I could hear was Dad telling me all will be well. As for my twin brother, I never set my eyes on him. Sometimes I wonder if he is really my blood. My mom completely disappeared. The doctor finally announced to Dad that there is nothing to be done. So Dad told him that I am coming home. I was excited to be home, but I felt bad again when Mom warned Dad not to bring me home because I'm going to be a burden to her. But I guess Dad's reason for bringing me home was to make sure I was around things that I love. Back home, I was treated as a non-existing being. But right inside me, I kept telling myself that I am alive. Friends stopped visiting me. Dad's pursuit ran dry because the life support machine that kept me breathing was very expensive. Before now, I could run away from Mom and Peter's noise, but now I can't avoid it. Dad couldn't help it anymore. Rosie was the only one that understands me. She is indeed an extraordinary cat. She feels my pains whenever Mom yells. She will come close to me, touching my hands with her mouth as if to say, "Don't worry, everything will be fine." Before, Dad used to come in to see me 3 times a day and then recharge the life support machine that kept me breathing. Surprisingly, one day, Dad tried removing the socket of the machine. Then Rosie cried out loud. This touched Dad, and he left in tears. Rosie always tiptoed into the room at any time of the day looking at me, and I know she is whispering something to me. Months passed by, and it was already 1, 2, 3 years. Dad got tired of me, and Mom complained I was occupying space, so I should be moved to a smaller room. And they transferred me to this small room where nobody was visiting apart from Rosie. This was the only time I saw Peter creep into the room. He looked at me and sighed and banged the door. It was not long I started hearing Christmas songs that told me it was Christmas again. I couldn't even celebrate. But in my subconscious mind, I was thanking God for another new year. And I was 17 this time because I was able to guess every period of the yearly celebration. Mom celebrated with her friends, making noise and smoking. Their noise became more unbearable for me. So Dad moved me to a clinic where nurses can take care of me. I saw Dad talking to the nurses. Who knows what Dad is telling them, I thought. I felt he was telling them to allow him to bring Rosie to stay with me. I felt a little relief as I saw Dad carry Rosie to sit beside me. At this time, I couldn't remember anything. I couldn't remember my crave for sciences, nor the moments I played with friends or the adventure room. But one picture kept appearing to me is Rosie's picture. She is my best friend. She is always close by me. So I decided to create my own world in my subconscious state. In this world, Rosie was my companion. We did a lot of things together. We went to school, shopping, restaurants, and played together. There were also these other 2 persons that joined our world. Perhaps they could be some victim of people in the coma state. Another 6 years went by, and I remembered not seeing Dad for a whole year. Well, I never cared about the physical world anymore because I was enjoying the new world I created. But one day Dad came by. I saw him weeping with my best flower, a rose flower, in his hands. He also bought me a science kit and some other things which he decorated my bed with. Then I could hear him say, "Happy 20th birthday, my angel." Dad left the room angrily. Then Rosie picked one of those rose flowers Dad had kept and brought it close to my nose. My goodness! I perceived it and smiled at her. She screamed in excitement. She kept screaming. That her scream attracted the doctors and nurses. By the time they arrived, my eyes were open. The resident doctor was surprised. He said he has never recorded any case as this since his 30 years of practice in the medical field. Gradually, I began to regain consciousness. I was not angry when the doctors told me that I cannot move my legs anymore because my spinal cord was affected badly. Although it took me time before I accepted to be confined to the wheelchair. After all, God gave me life, so I am grateful to Him. Before I was discharged from the hospital, my mom came, begging that I forgive her attitude towards me, just that she never liked to have a baby girl. But now she has realized her mistakes. Peter was crying and feels guilty for pushing me down. He confessed that he was acting out of the influence of Mom. Who am I not to forgive them? What if I died? I wonder if I will be here. God forgave me and gave me a new life, so I forgave them. And I was glad to reunite with my family again.